Chapter 313. 294 Inexorable storm. With the help of the Pot's navy, Fawkes tore up the contract and counterattacked the Cabados alliance, achieving a series of victories. He achieved an unparalleled and brilliant achievement. He was the symbol of victory and success. No matter how many battles there were in this world, it was all a Vanity Fair for him to build his achievements. The Cabados alliance retreated under Fawkes' counterattack. The nobles did not want to lose the hegemony that they had gained. They were also inspired by Fawkes' various means, so they sent people to negotiate with the Pot's empire. As long as the Pot's empire gave up supporting the Euron alliance and supported the Cabados alliance, they promised to give the Pot's empire more benefits. At this point, the two hostile groups were simply competing to see who was stronger. The Pot's forces, who had been expelled from the Heaton Peninsula by the Heaton people, were now invited back by the Heaton people themselves. Moreover, the Pot's empire also had good cards to play. Therefore, the Pot's empire made more requests to the Euron alliance. They even wanted them to admit that they had ceded many city-states on the Heaton Peninsula to the Pot's empire. Otherwise, they would support the Cabados alliance. At this time, the Euron people were finally angry and were ready to use the citizens' assembly to exile Fawkes. Fawkes fled when he heard the news, but this politician had no ambition and did not stop there. He went directly to the Pot's empire to discuss the conditions. Fawkes told the Pot's people that he had a way to lead the Pot's army back to the Heaton Peninsula. As long as he was appointed as the king of all Heaton, he could achieve the wish that Darius had failed to achieve. If the Pot's people really listened to his bewitchment, the situation might have been different. However, the Pot's people killed Fawkes, and the life of this ambitious person ended there. The development of the situation had made the Pot's people no longer need a king of Heaton. The Euron alliance and the Cabados alliance had been greatly weakened and were asking for help from the Pot's. The Pot's could control all of Heaton. It was under this background that Zeus came to the vineyard to find Ammon. The father of the gods of Olympus was angry. He wanted to punish Ammon and truly unify Heaton before completely defeating the Pot's. But what would Ammon do? After Zeus left, Ammon still stayed in Aesop's farm to do the work of a farmer, as if nothing had changed. Hermes was extremely anxious. He stared at the vineyard every day and thought to himself, when will this god leave? When the grapes were made into wine and the wine was stored in the cellar, Ammon brought Medanzo to bid farewell to Aesop. He said to Aesop, "Old friend, I have to go. You have returned to your homeland and are very happy here. Call to me and I will hear your voice. Your God is still with you and waiting for you in heaven." Aesop enjoyed his remaining years in the city of Mygilai with his cousin and 3 nephews. He even made some wise friends. It was the life in his homeland that this old man was looking for, and his days were very comfortable. Ammon also knew that Aesop's life was coming to an end. The next time they met, it would be in heaven. Medanzo left with Ammon and headed north out of the city of Mygilai. On the way, he asked curiously, "Aren't we going to the Garden of Eden or the Kingdom of Heaven? I heard that Link has just passed the test and has become an angel in the Kingdom of Heaven. He even talked to me in the Kingdom of Heaven 2 days ago, showing off that he is ahead of me." Ammon replied, "Medanzo, you are on the road. Achievements are not for show, but for your own verification. You are still the leader of my disciples and the leader of the angels in the future. The reason why I brought you with me is that you need experience. Do you still remember the story of the vineyard? I pay the workers who enter the vineyard in the morning the same wages as those who enter the vineyard in the afternoon. For the Kingdom of Heaven, those who come later and those who arrive first get the same amount." Medanzo suddenly realized and said, "Oh, so you did that for me to see." Ammon smiled and said, "I did it for everyone to see, of course, including you. People can get the inspiration they need from it." Medanzo blinked and said, "My God, where are we going now, and what are we going to do?" Ammon replied, "From now on until we leave the Heaton Peninsula, you have to call me Ammon in any public occasion. We are going to escort someone, an elder I have respected since I was a child, named Aristotle." Why did Aristotle come to Mygilai? He was just passing by. As the envoy of the Kingdom of Macedonia, Aristotle had just gone to Euron not long ago and represented the Kingdom of Macedonia to conclude an alliance with Euron. On the surface, the content of the alliance seemed to be an alliance between the Kingdom of Macedonia and the city of Euron to jointly resist Pots. But in fact, this was a covenant in which Euron surrendered to Macedonia. The so-called alliance was dominated by Macedonia, and the Kingdom of Macedonia had the right to issue the oracle. In the past, Euron had signed agreements with other states as the leader of the alliance, but this time, it had become a subservient party. For Macedonia to be able to achieve such diplomatic results, Aristotle, the plenipotentiary envoy sent by King Philip II, could not go unnoticed. Aristotle was originally a nobleman from the city of Euron, and his teacher was the famous sage Plato. Later, he was hired by the King of Macedonia, Philip II, to be a court teacher in the palace. This time, he was sent to the city of Euron to discuss the matters of the alliance. When Aristotle returned to Euron, he not only communicated with the nobles in the city, but also preached to the people in the square and in the shrine. He denounced what Fox had done and told the people that the current Heaton city-states were facing a great crisis. The people of Heaton had once united to repel the army of Pots, but they did not know how to properly enjoy the fruits of victory. Euron and Gabados fought for hegemony. Under the incitement of the ambitious Fox, both sides had successively colluded with the forces of Pots in an attempt to strengthen their own power, and did not hesitate to betray the interests of the entire Union Kingdom of Heaton. The enemies who had been defeated were invited back by the people of their own accord. The goal that Darius Iron Hooves could not achieve was achieved by the people of Heaton themselves. Aristotle summoned all the city-states of Heaton to unite, and not to betray the interests of everyone for the ambition of one city-state. Only in this way could real strength and prosperity be achieved. The unity began with the alliance between Macedonia and Euron. The Kingdom of Macedonia wanted to retaliate against the invasion of the Pots, and also punish those traitors who colluded with foreign enemies. What Aristotle said was the truth. It was the city of Euron that first colluded with the Pots, and later, the city of Gabados also colluded with Pots. The city of Euron was almost unable to breathe under the powerful offensive of Gabados. They also hoped to be able to get help from the increasingly powerful Kingdom of Macedonia in the north, expel the forces of the Pots, and defeat Gabados to restore their former prosperity and power. However, the help did not come without a price. The purpose of Macedonia was to unite the city-states of Heaton to end the civil war and expel the forces of Pots, not to support Euron to become the overlord again. The city of Euron was bound to be controlled by Macedonia, so the people of Euron were divided into two groups, respectively belonging to the groups that supported and opposed Macedonia, and they could not agree on the decisions of the city. Aristotle's speech moved many people, and finally, the citizens of the city made a decision and signed the covenant. The people of Euron hoped to temporarily defeat Gabados with the help of Macedonia, and first get out of the current predicament. They did not intend to abide by this covenant in the future. Although Fox was dead, his toxic stream was still there, and it affected many people in Euron city. Aristotle achieved great diplomatic success. He left Euron with the contract and returned to Macedonia under the escort of the guards. On the way, he had to pass through the northern border of the city of Maduri. Ammon had wanted to visit Aristotle for a long time, and they could meet on the road. Ammon and Medanzo went on the road, but they did not fly directly to find Aristotle's convoy. Instead, they waited on the road that they had to pass through in the northern border of Maduri. It was a mountainous terrain, and the winding road crossed a continuous mountain range, appearing and disappearing in the dense forest. They had to pass through several passes in the mountains. Medanzo said, "The terrain here is very dangerous. It is not suitable for a large army to pass through, but it is most suitable for ambushes and assassinations." Ammon nodded and said, "That's the terrain. Let's sneak through the dense forest and take a look." Medanzo asked, "Do you want to check the situation around the road? Would someone assassinate the special envoy of the Kingdom of Macedonia here? Isn't he a little too daring?" Ammon replied, "There are many people in the world who are audacious to the extreme. Not to mention the special envoy of the small kingdom of Macedonia, even great emperors like Cyrus or Synac would be assassinated, wouldn't they? I still remember the scene of you charging at Synaca's guards alone. It was very impressive. Madanzo smiled a little embarrassedly. I was just attracting attention, not the main force to assassinate Synac. Then he sighed and said, the assassination of Synac was a success, and Princess Sisela has also left with Gilgamesh. Aman glanced at him and said, is there a need for you to sigh? Madanzo changed the topic. Aristotle is not a tyrant like Synac, but a respected sage. Who would assassinate him for no reason? This time it was Aman who sighed. It would be best if there is no ambush. I just want you to see if this road is safe. If there is really an assassination, it will be for nothing else but the contract that Aristotle is carrying. Madanzo asked in confusion, but who would do that? The boss or the combatants? It's meaningless. The alliance was decided by the city of Yaluan and the kingdom of Macedonia. Killing the envoy won't change the fact. Even if they wanted to use this method to stop the alliance, they should have done it before Aristotle arrived at Yaluan city, not now. If they really did that, it would lead to the joint revenge of Yaluan and Macedonia. They couldn't be any more foolish. Aman sighed again. You're right. It's exactly because of this that it's unexpected. At this moment, Madanzo exclaimed in his soul, my God, there is an ambush in front of us, and there are a lot of assassins. So you have already discovered it, a friend from afar, why not drink? Chapter 3:14. The mountain road ahead passed through a small open area between two mountain passes, with cliffs and rocks on both sides. 30 people were lying in ambush in the dense forest. 24 people were holding crossbows in their hands. The strings had not been pulled, but the arrows were already nocked. The black arrow shafts and tail feathers were inconspicuous in the shadows of the trees, and the arrowheads had a faint blue luster, as if they had been fed with a huge poison. This was a strong crossbow that was forbidden by the common people. The sound made by the bowstring was very quiet, and the size of the arrow was not large, but it could shoot very far and accurately. The black crossbows were inscribed with magic patterns, and the powerful crossbow strings could only be pulled by warriors with powerful bloodlines. 24 crossbowmen were lying in ambush on both sides of the mountain road, 12 people on each side. Looking from the side of the dense forest where Madanzo and Aman were, there was a person lying in ambush on the high ground opposite the road, holding a staff in his hand to survey the whole situation. The faint aura he exuded was that of a supreme mage. Among the crossbowmen, there was also a warrior with a sword lurking silently there. The invisible power they possessed was actually that of a supreme warrior. There were also 3 priests among the assassins, 2 on this side of the road and 1 on the opposite side. Madanzo took a deep breath and said, all magic crossbows, 2 complete squads in ambush, a supreme mage in command, and 2 supreme warriors on the outside. What kind of formation is this? Even if I found them, it would be impossible to quietly subdue all these assassins. Aman nodded. The location of their ambush is very good. On both sides of the road, they can monitor the situation on the opposite side. There is a supreme mage in the middle on guard, 2 supreme warriors to protect and coordinate with each other, and 3 priests to form a detection array. Even if I were to take action, it would be impossible to get rid of them all at once without making a sound. Someone must have noticed the movement and sounded the alarm. Madanzo frowned. These people are here to assassinate Aristotle? Isn't that a bit too exaggerated? Aman also frowned. There is no need for such a big formation to assassinate a person. Taking advantage of the chaos to escape, the more assassins there are, the better. Look at this formation, what are they trying to do? Madanzo said in a low voice, silencing them must be for the sake of silencing them. They didn't just want to kill Mr. Aristotle. Not a single one of them will be left alive. This diplomatic mission will completely disappear from the world. Aman nodded and said, I've heard that Mr. Aristotle brought his guards with him. 2 little ones, too. There were 24 knights in the squad, and the captain should be a supreme warrior. If the purpose of the assassins was not just to assassinate a special envoy, but to make the envoy disappear and never return to the Kingdom of Macedonia, then this lineup is understandable. Madanzo asked again, it would take at least the power of a state to send such an assassination team. Who could it be? Amon reminded, look at the attire of those warriors. Madanzo was slightly startled. It's the Kybadans' attire. But I don't think these people are Kybadans. The skin on the face of a real Kybadan warrior can't be so thin, and it's impossible to wear several rings on their fingers. It's clear that they are deliberately pretending to be Kybadans. Amon said, well, you have a good eye. Then who do you think they are, the Bosnians? Madanzo was puzzled. They clearly want to kill them, and at the same time, they are also prepared for the worst-case scenario. If someone in the diplomatic mission can escape and run back to report, then they will blame it on the Kybadans. But the Bosnians don't have to do this. It doesn't make sense to kill an envoy. If the Yelon city and Macedonia are truly allied, the death of the envoy will only arouse their hatred towards the Bosnians. Amon asked meaningfully, then who do you think is most likely to do this? The intelligence is so accurate, and the ambush is so coincidental. Think about the most impossible things. Madanzo gasped again. Could it be the Yelon people? Amon sighed regretfully. They signed the covenant, and then regretted it. But it's not good to openly tear up the covenant and incur the revenge of Macedonia. What should we do? It seems that the only feasible way is to make sure that this covenant will never reach Macedonia and that the diplomatic mission will disappear from this world without letting anyone know who did it. Madanzo said, will the Yelon people be so insidious? Amon said, whether this is the case or not, everything will be clear after we capture these assassins and interrogate them. Madanzo quietly pulled out the key of fate. Do we do it now? Amon shook his head and said, don't worry. You are also a general on the battlefield. Let me ask you, under what circumstances can we subdue all of them silently? It's not easy to make a move with this kind of mutual vigilance formation. Although they can't be our opponents, if we choose the wrong time, they will make a mess of this place. They haven't assassinated them yet, so if we make a move now, it will be equivalent to us launching a sneak attack. Madanzo thought for a moment and said, no matter what the situation is, we have to choose the best time for ourselves. Then the best chance is when Aristotle's convoy enters the ambush and they just happen to make a move. We can make a move at the same time. Amon nodded and said, it's settled then. I'll be responsible for the 15 people, including the Supreme Mage, and the 15 people here will be left to you. Once you make a move, don't give them a chance to fight back. Otherwise, the crossbows in the hands of the warriors will be very troublesome, and shooting indiscriminately may cause accidental injuries. As for Mr. Aristotle's safety, I'll be responsible for it. Aristotle's convoy entered the mountains. There were 3 carriages in total, and all the important supplies carried by the envoy were placed in the carriages, accompanied by the envoy's servants. There were 2 squads of 24 knights escorting the convoy. The guard captain, Eisen, was a supreme warrior. He should have been sitting in the first carriage, but after entering the mountains, he rode next to the second carriage. Aristotle was sitting in this carriage. After passing through a pass, there were 2 towering mountains in front of them, and there was another pass. This was a small open area with deep mountains and lush forests on both sides. Eisen suddenly heard Aristotle's voice. The terrain here is dangerous, and it's a good place for an ambush. The cavalry can't see what's going on in the dense forest, and they can't rush in on their horses, but the assassins can ambush in the forest and shoot arrows. Tell everyone to be on guard and pick up their shields. At Eisen's order, the accompanying knights put on their helmets and picked up their shields. The cavalry was equipped with shields to block stray arrows and protect their vital parts during the charge, but they did not hold the heavy shields in their hands when marching, but hung them on the hips of their horses, and only took them off when fighting. The same was true for the heavy helmets, which were uncomfortable to wear all the time, and were usually hung on the shoulders of the horses during the march. The guards were on guard, and Eisen asked with some confusion, "My lord, do you think someone will dare to assassinate us?" We have already made an alliance with the Euron people, and it doesn't make much sense to make trouble now, does it? Aristotle replied unhurriedly, it's never wrong to be cautious. Although I called on the Euron assembly to pass a resolution to form an alliance, it was also because many people couldn't answer my questions in public about their collusion with the Boz people, so I had to make such a decision. But I can see that those who are really in power in the city of Euron are not willing to give in to Macedonia. As soon as I leave, some people will go back on their word. And I have also heard that the emissaries of the Boz people will arrive in Euron after I leave, which may put new pressure on the Euron people to change their minds. Eisen was taken aback and said, does Euron want to tear up the alliance? That's too fast. Aristotle sighed, they don't need to tear up the alliance. They just need to pretend that this alliance has never been signed, and let the whereabouts of our diplomatic mission be unknown. This is only the worst speculation, and the possibility of it happening is very small, but we can't take it lightly either. Before his voice trailed off, birds in the forest on the left side were startled, and suddenly a murderous intent filled the air. 12 black crossbow bolts were shot out with a sharp whistling sound. Fortunately, the knights were on guard with their shields in hand. The momentum of the crossbow bolts was amazing, and even cracks appeared on the shields, and some of the knights fell off their horses. Some of the knights tried to dodge, but the horses were hit by the bolts and fell down. The guards were in a mess in an instant. The attack did not only happen on the left side of the procession, but the chaos was only a cover. 12 arrows were shot out from the forest on the right side at the same time, silent and as if wrapped in translucent light, they arrived in the blink of an eye. It was clear that there was a supreme mage casting magic to coordinate with them. The 12 arrows were shot at the carriage in the middle of the procession. Eisen beside the carriage and Aristotle in the carriage were the targets of the attacks. The supreme warrior Eisen was also caught off guard. With a loud shout, he drew his sword and swung it out. He could only block 4 arrows that were attacking him, and 1 arrow was shot at his horse. The other 7 arrows that were shot at the carriage were too late to block. At this moment, there was a sudden buzzing sound, and a light blue shield appeared out of thin air. It protected the carriage and Eisen outside. The crossbow bolts shot into the blue light, making a crisp sound as if they were breaking through a layer of ice. The magic shield was broken, but the arrows had slowed down. Eisen's sword glowed with a gust of wind, and all 12 arrows were shot down. He was already in a cold sweat, and he whispered, "Thank you for your help, my lord. Your magic is so brilliant." Then he shouted to the guards, "Dismount and get into formation, raise your shields and shrink the formation, it's more important to protect the lord." In this dense mountain forest, there was no advantage in riding a horse. The guards dismounted one after another and raised their shields around Aristotle's carriage, holding their weapons as if they were facing a great enemy. Judging from the round of crossbow bolts just now, the assassin they met was not an ordinary assassin. Next, there would definitely be a thunderous attack. No one knew how many enemies were lurking around. However, something strange happened again. The assassins only shot the first round of crossbow bolts, and then there was silence, missing the best opportunity to attack. They waited for Aristotle's guards to dismount and set up a defensive formation, and did not attack again. Crossbow bolts like that could be fired quickly and continuously. When the knights were in a chaotic formation, the continuous arrows were more threatening and could definitely cause a lot of casualties. Not to mention that there was a supreme mage to cover and cooperate with them, so why was there no movement? Eisen held his sword nervously and said to himself, "What's going on?" A man flew out of the dense forest, and the guards were about to launch a counterattack, but then they saw the man fall to the ground with his claws and fangs, and then he stopped moving. It seemed that he had been knocked unconscious and thrown out. Then, people were also thrown out of the dense forest on the other side, one after another, neatly arranged on the road. When the last person was thrown out, he was still holding his staff in his hand. Eisen cried out, "That's the high priest of Euron, Merlin." "Lord Aristotle, you guessed it right, the Euron people really want to assassinate us." "But, who? Which expert helped us?" Aristotle had already lifted the curtain and stepped out of the carriage. He bowed to the front and said, "May I know which god blessed me, an unfortunate mortal?" At this time, someone smiled and said, "My two old friends were passing by and happened to see an assassin lurking on the side of the road, so we helped you take him down. You didn't lose anyone, it's a blessing in disguise." With the sound of snorting, Aman came out of the dense forest on the right side, and Madanzo also came out from the left side, following behind him. Eisen was stunned, he did not know these two. Aristotle also looked surprised, but after a moment, he returned to normal. He separated the guards and went forward to salute, "So it's you." When Aman was only 14 years old, Aristotle had seen him in the town of Duk. Later, when Aman became General Igut and was stationed in the Kenmit defensive line, Aristotle was also in the army. Now the sage had gray hair on his temples, while Aman was still in his early 20s. Madanzo's appearance had not changed much compared to the past, so Aristotle could recognize him at a glance. Aristotle knew very well that the person standing in front of him was a god, and it was the god that the people of Igut believed in. But at this time and place, he did not know how to address him. Aman rushed forward and held Aristotle's arm, saying, "Sir, you don't have to salute me. It has always been my wish to have the opportunity to repay you. You are also one of the most respected elders in my life." At the same time, he said in his soul, "You don't have to think of me as a god. I am the retired General Igut, a child who grew up in the town of Duk. My name is still Aman." There was no need for Aman to remind him anything, Aristotle already understood what he meant. At this time, Eisen came over and said, "Lord Aristotle, do you know these two heroes?" Aristotle turned around and explained, "His name is Aman, a friend I made when I was traveling in the continent. I also watched him grow up. As for this hero, his name is Madanzo, and he used to be a good general. They came to the Yaluan Peninsula to travel, and they wanted to visit me, but they happened to encounter this Aman." This young man seemed to have the same name as the god of Igut. But the name of Madanzo, the supreme warrior of Macedonia, Eisen had never heard of it. Eisen also came forward and bowed to express his gratitude. At the same time, he was shocked. Every great achiever in the world was arrogant, because they had magic that ordinary people could not imagine. But in front of Aman and Madanzo, Eisen could not be proud. The two of them actually killed so many powerful assassins in such a short time. Their means were too amazing. Before Aman and Aristotle gave any orders, Eisen stood aside obediently, and the other guards naturally did not dare to make any noise. Aman, however, asked Aristotle in a sincere tone, "We have known each other for a long time. When I was 14, you saved me. At that time, I was still a child who knew nothing. After I achieved great success, I also met you. But until you used magic, I never knew that your magic was so brilliant. Just now, you did not even use your staff. How did you do it?" Aristotle stretched out a hand and spread his fingers. In his palm was a blue aquaticore. He smiled at Aman and said, "Although I did not use my staff, I held this parangan in my hand and used it as a medium to cast water magic. Do you remember? He is the gift you gave me in Cape States." Before the assassins made their move, Aman did not make a move to alarm them. When the arrows were shot, Aman used a very clever air element disturbance spell to slow down the speed and power of the arrows in the air. Otherwise, those magic arrows would have caused casualties. When Aristotle's carriage was under heavy attack, Aman was ready to stop the arrows, but Aristotle, who was sitting in the carriage, had already used a blue magic shield to help the supreme warrior Eisen block the arrows. This was beyond Aman's expectation. It was not until this moment that he realized that Aristotle was also a brilliant magic master. Judging from the way he held the parangan in his hand and instantaneously cast magic, he must have achieved at least the 8th level. Aman looked at the blue aquaticore and said, "If someone told me that you are also a supreme mage and I have never met you, I would not be surprised at all. But we have known you for many years, and we have never noticed that you are capable of magic. Your achievements have even escaped my eyes. This is a situation I have never encountered before. I would like to ask for your advice. Ammon, as the Lord of Heaven and one of the most accomplished gods on the continent, actually wanted to ask a mortal for advice. This was not modesty, but a genuine request. He had encountered a situation he had never encountered before. No supreme mage in the world could escape Ammon's eyes. Even if he could not tell how powerful the person was, he could at least detect traces of the person's aura. But he had never noticed that Aristotle was capable of magic, not to mention that he was such a brilliant supreme mage. The assassin in front of him had become a trivial matter. This unexpected discovery was something Ammon had to figure out. Aristotle frowned slightly, but he still replied with a smile, "You have never noticed that I am a great achiever. There may be 2 reasons. First, it's because you respect me and won't use your detection magic to spy on me. Second, it's because I've forgotten." Madanzo interrupted curiously, "What, you have forgotten? What do you mean?" Aristotle explained, "Although I have that magical power, it is not what I seek. I only regard myself as a person who spreads ideas and never use magic to prove anything. I will not use it when it is not necessary, and I do not regard myself as a mage at all." Chapter 3:15. Hearing Aristotle's words, Ammon could not help but think of Thales, the sage of Mygillai. Thales preached and imparted all kinds of knowledge to the people in the square all day long, but everyone laughed at him and said that his knowledge was useless to the merchants of Mygillai. As a result, Thales borrowed a sum of capital from Aesop to start a business, made a lot of money, and then went on to preach and impart all kinds of knowledge. Thales only did business to prove one thing, and that was that the knowledge he passed on was not useless to the merchants, but that was not what he wanted. Thales had proved that he was an excellent merchant, but he was not a merchant. Looking at the supreme mage in front of him, Aristotle was indeed not a mage, and there was no need for him to pursue the identity of a mage. Ammon thought of himself again. Zeus had once made a promise to him, "Here, you can't be a god." This promise sounded a little funny, because Ammon was a god, and this was a fact that could not be changed no matter what. So how could he keep this promise and seek peace of mind at the same time? As soon as he met Aristotle, Ammon got the answer. Mortals often said thank you to the gods in their hearts, but Ammon could only say thank you to Aristotle at this time. Seeing that Ammon was silent, Eisen finally could not help but ask, "What should we do with these assassins? Especially that high priest Merlin, he is an important person in Yaren City." Aristotle glanced at the unconscious assassins lying on the street, thought for a moment, and replied, "Take them all away, and wait until we are in a safe place." Ammon said, "Mr. Aristotle, as long as I'm here, it's a safe place." Eisen asked again, "What about after the interrogation? What should we do with these people? We can't take so many captives with us." The current status of these assassins was equivalent to that of prisoners of war. In the conflicts between the various city-states in Hilton, the treatment of prisoners of war was basically the same. Nobles with status would be detained, and the other party would be required to pay a large ransom. Civilian prisoners of war with no value might be sold as slaves. Sometimes, they would be executed or released. Since these people were captured by Ammon, they were Ammon's spoils of war, so he had to seek Ammon's opinion on how to deal with them. Aristotle continued, "This batch of assassins is very important to the Hilton kingdom. If possible, I want to bring all of them back. Ammon, Madanzo, if you want a ransom, the kingdom of Hilton can pay. Please let me take him away." Ammon waved his hand. "Do as you please. I don't need any ransom. From now on, they are your captives." Eisen frowned and said, "It's such a long journey, how are we going to escort these assassins back? These people are here to silence them. If the news gets out, I'm afraid there will be people who will kill these assassins along the way to silence them." Madanzo smiled and said, "Don't worry, we're here to escort Mr. Aristotle. Just leave these 30 assassins to me. I promise they'll be on their way obediently. You don't have to worry." Aristotle instructed the guards, disarm these assassins first. Search them for anything extra on their bodies. They'll be your spoils of war. They set up an ambush deep in the mountains, so they couldn't have come on foot. The horses must be hidden somewhere nearby. We've lost some war horses. Search those horses too. Hearing that they could take advantage of the situation, the guards happily searched the assassins' bodies. Some even went to look for the horses hidden in the mountains. Thanks to the generosity of Lord Ammon and Lord Aristotle, everyone had made a small fortune. Not to mention the other things, just the weapons carried by the assassins were worth a lot of money. At this time, a supreme warrior had already woken up. His body was sore and limp and he couldn't move. When he found a guard fumbling in his arms, he blushed and shouted angrily, "I'm the supreme warrior of Yaluan City, Moira. You can't be so rude. Even if I'm a captive, I still demand the courtesy of a captive." Madanzo stepped forward and kicked him lightly. He sneered, "Courtesy? Why didn't you mention courtesy when you were lying in ambush to silence us? What's so great about being a supreme warrior? Don't show off here, just lie down." Sure enough, the guards found dozens of horses hidden in the nearby mountains. Madanzo woke up the assassins. Not only did he use magic to restrict their strength, but he also tied their hands behind their backs and made them walk behind the convoy. Madanzo rode a horse to escort them, while Ammon and Aristotle rode in the same carriage. Only then did Aizen realize that there was not only one supreme mage in the team of assassins, but also two supreme warriors. He couldn't help but feel even more afraid. Fortunately, Ammon and Madanzo took action. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Such a team looked really strange. That afternoon, they walked out of the mountains and came to a town, attracting the attention of the local residents. Madanzo tied the hands of the assassins behind their backs and tied them together with ropes. Aristotle didn't stop him. Ammon guessed the intention of the sage, so he quietly gave a few instructions to Madanzo. When had the high priest of Yaluan City, Merlin, ever suffered such humiliation? His hands were tied behind his back and tied with ropes. He walked in the streets with a group of captives and was watched by the onlookers. There were even children who spat and threw stones at him, as if they were watching a monkey show. The officials in the town were shocked to learn that the Kingdom of Macedonia's diplomatic mission had been attacked in the mountains. They were relieved to learn that there were no casualties, but then they began to worry because someone recognized Merlin and the other two supreme warriors. That night, when they were resting in the hostel, local officials came to express their condolences and apologies. They said that the special envoy had encountered gangsters here and that it was the fault of poor public security management. They hoped that the special envoy would hand over the gangsters to the local magistrate for severe punishment. Aizen received the group of people and shook his head. "They are not gangsters, but assassins. They are now our captives, and we will take them back to the Kingdom of Macedonia for punishment." The local official added, "We are willing to pay whatever ransom Lord Aristotle and Lord Aizen demands." But Aizen, at the behest of Aristotle, refused this request. The redemption of the prisoners would have to wait until the mission had returned to Macedonia, and the Migilai magistrates did not have to interfere in the matter. The officials in the town had no choice but to send someone to Yaluan City overnight to report the news. The next day, Aristotle's convoy continued to set off, leaving the territory of Migilai and entering the city of Olympios. In the city of Olympios, the 30 assassins were still tied in 2 strings and followed the convoy. Almost all the people in the city looked at them. Merlin and the 2 supreme warriors were, of course, recognized again. So the same thing happened again. Some people asked Aristotle to ransom the prisoners of war, and some people asked Aristotle to hand over the assassins to the local magistrate for severe punishment. However, Aristotle refused for the same reason. Along the way, Aristotle did not ask the identity of the assassins, nor did he interrogate anyone. The captives were also frightened and confused. They did not know what Lord Aristotle meant and what kind of fate awaited them. In particular, the 3 arrogant great achievers felt that such torture was worse than death. Along the way, They asked several times to be interrogated, but Madanzo ignored them. They were assassins who assassinated the Macedonian diplomatic mission. Even if someone wanted to rescue them or silence them, it was not appropriate to do so openly. They could only set up an ambush in a hidden place. When the convoy left the border of Olympios, they encountered another group of assassins in the mountains. The target of the assassins was not Aristotle's convoy, but the group of captives following behind the convoy who had no ability to resist. As a result, when the convoy walked out of the forest, the 30 captives escorted by Madanzo became 90. They walked on the road in a grandiose manner. Further north, they entered the territory controlled by the Kingdom of Macedonia. The second group of assassins was also urgently sent by the city of Yalon, but they were also taken down by Amon and Madanzo. Madanzo deliberately mixed the first group of assassins with the second group of assassins, and retied them with ropes so that they could talk to each other on the road. As a result, the captives quarreled among themselves. The captured supreme warrior Moira cursed the commander of the second group of assassins, claiming that he had been secretly ordered by the city to assassinate the Kingdom of Macedonia's diplomatic mission. Unfortunately, he had failed and was captured. The city had sent reinforcements, but not only did they not try to rescue them, they even wanted to kill them. It was too shameless. Madanzo could not help but scold, "Mr. Aristotle has no enmity with you, but he wants to tear up the treaty as soon as he signs it." He even resorted to despicable means of assassination, and he still has the nerve to scold others. The captives lowered their heads and did not speak. The delegation of more than 20 people with 90 prisoners of war passed through various towns of the Kingdom of Macedonia, and under the onlookers of the people, they arrived at the city of Macedonia. Before they could see the city walls of Macedonia, smoke and dust rose in the distance. The sound of horses' hooves rumbled, flags fluttered, and the King Philip II personally led the guards out of the city to welcome the returning delegation, giving the returning delegation the highest standard of courtesy. The Kingdom of Macedonia was a state that rose in the later period of the Hyban War, and the current King Philip II was also a great hero. When the Bosnian army had just invaded, the Kingdom of Macedonia had once surrendered to the Bosnians. The Bosnians used the local people to build military fortresses and transport logistical supplies. At that time, Philip II was the uncle of the young king. He sent a group of trusted aides to infiltrate the civilian troops to spy on and collect various information about the Bosnian people. He also analyzed and sorted out a series of information about the distribution of the Bosnian army on the Heaton Peninsula, the supply routes, and so on, and provided it to Gabados and Yalon in the south. In the later decisive Battle of Hyban, the military information provided by Philip II played an important role. After the end of the Hyban War, the Bosnian army withdrew from the Heaton Peninsula, and the situation in Macedonia was chaotic. Philip II took the opportunity to depose the young king and ascended the throne himself. Not only did he pacify the situation in the state, but the Kingdom of Macedonia also took advantage of the situation to rise, filling the chaotic power vacuum in the surrounding areas after the withdrawal of the Bosnian army. At this time, in the south of the Heaton Peninsula, the Yalon alliance and the Gabados alliance fought for hegemony, and civil war broke out one after another. In the north, where the situation was relatively calm, the sphere of influence controlled by the Kingdom of Macedonia had been quietly expanding. The places that the Bosnian people withdrew from were immediately occupied by Macedonia. By the time Yalon and Gabados, who were trapped in the quagmire of civil war, were greatly weakened, the Kingdom of Macedonia had become the most powerful force in the north of the Heaton Peninsula. With the expansion of the territory and the growing strength of the state, the Kingdom of Macedonia ushered in a golden period of development. Philip II specially invited the famous sage Aristotle to be the court teacher, to teach his young son Alexander. When the ambitious fox instigated the scuffle between Yalon and Gabados developed into an uncontrollable situation, and the Bosnian forces made a comeback, Philip II finally decided to pacify the south of the Heaton Peninsula. He sent a mission to the city of Yalon to discuss the alliance, with the intention of ending the civil war, unifying the Heaton Peninsula, and completely expelling the Bosnian forces. The Yalan people concluded an alliance, but as soon as they turned around, they went back on their word and sent assassins in an attempt to make the mission disappear forever. However, the assassins failed and were captured, and were brought back to Macedonia. Even before Aristotle arrived, Philip II received the news. The king did not fly into a rage out of humiliation. Instead, he was overjoyed. In his opinion, Yalan, who was at the end of the road, was courting death. Originally, he had only established an alliance according to the traditional customs between the states of the Khitan Peninsula, but the treacherous behavior of the city of Yalan gave him an excuse to completely unify the peninsula. Aristotle was able to capture the assassins alive and bring them back to Macedonia as living evidence, which was simply wonderful. Under such circumstances, if the Macedonian army went south, the states of the Khitan Peninsula would have nothing to say, so Philip II personally went out of the city to welcome the mission. There was another reason why he did not hesitate to leave the city for dozens of miles and was in such a hurry. The main god that the Macedonians believed in was Zeus, and on the night before Aristotle's return, Philip II received an oracle from Zeus, telling him that someone would follow Aristotle to the kingdom of Macedonia, and that this person would bring unprecedented achievements to the kingdom, even beyond everyone's dreams and imagination. The oracle did not say who this person was, but Philip II was elated. In his opinion, the captives brought back by Aristotle were already of great value. Aristotle had completed his mission by handing over the signed covenant and the captives to the king. This was perhaps the most dramatic covenant in the history of the Khitan United Kingdom, because it was already torn up when it was handed over to the other party. It was unknown whether the nobles in Yalan city would cry, because it was clearly written in the covenant that the two states would form an alliance, not to invade each other, and would jointly resist foreign enemies. But now the covenant had become invalid, and the captives were the evidence that the Yalan people had broken the covenant. Since the oracle of Zeus did not mention the name of the person, in theory, he could be anyone brought back by Aristotle, or he could be among the captives. So Philip II had to deal with the matter carefully. He did not kill any of the captives, but put them under house arrest and interrogated them separately. He gave them preferential treatment, but he was not allowed to ransom them. Chapter 3:16. Just after Aristotle left the city of Yaran, the emissaries of the Pats Empire also arrived. They put new pressure on the military and political officials of the city of Yaran and threatened, if you join forces with Macedonia and betray Pats, then Pats will fully support Gabados and completely destroy Yaran. You are far away from Macedonia, but closer to Gabados. Please don't forget, it was you who made the decision to ask for help from Pats. Why are you going back on your word now? You will definitely be punished by the gods for this. The city of Yaran had reluctantly agreed to form an alliance with Macedonia. In fact, they would rather sell the interests of the Khitan Peninsula to the faraway Pats in exchange for the position of hegemon than yield to Macedonia on the Khitan Peninsula. Under the threat of the Pats people and the new promise, Yaran changed his mind and decided not to let the alliance take effect. He sent the high priest Merlin to lead assassins to assassinate the emissaries. This was a top-secret operation. Whether they succeeded or not, the identity of the assassins could not be exposed. Therefore, Merlin brought 2 supreme warriors, 3 mages, 24 elite warriors, and even dressed like the Gabados. This lineup was more than enough to get rid of Aristotle's emissaries, and it was also very thoughtful. Unfortunately, they failed. Not only did they fail, but they were all captured alive. Not only were they captured alive, but they were also publicly paraded with their hands tied. Not only were they recognized, but they were also watched from thousands of miles away. The worst-case scenario that he could imagine with his imagination had all happened. Was this the punishment of the gods? What they feared the most happened. A bound supreme mage, as an assassin who was captured by mistake, walked thousands of miles with the other captives, enduring indescribable humiliation. At first, Merlin was ashamed and angry, and the resentment in his heart was also indescribable. But along the way, he was watched too many times, and he had to calm down. Gradually, he came to understand that this was what he deserved. Yaron betrayed the alliance, and he actually wanted to kill the Macedonian emissaries to silence them. This kind of despicable behavior was despicable. Otherwise, the assassins would not have dared to expose their identities. He was the commander of the assassination, and now the result was his own doing. What reason did the people he assassinated have to cover up for him? For a time, Merlin was numb, just like a walking corpse. However, when Aristotle's convoy encountered the second assassination attempt, his thoughts churned and he thought of more things. The primary target of the reinforcements sent from Yaluan city was not Aristotle's emissary group, but the captives who had been captured by mistake. The great warrior Moira scolded the commander of the second batch of assassins for being scolded by Madanzo. Merlin heard all this but did not say a word. When they entered Macedonia city, Merlin, who was tied up, became calm instead. He knew that it was impossible for him to return to Yaluan to serve. Even if he was ransomed as a captive, he did not intend to go back. In terms of personal glory and the reputation of the city, this experience was a disgrace. When he was placed in a comfortable residence, and King Philip II of Macedon personally came to interrogate him, Merlin simply said everything, and then asked calmly, "Your Majesty, what are you going to do with me? Do you want to sacrifice my head to the flag and send an army to punish the Yaluan people?" Philip II replied, "The city of Yaluan is self-destructing, and the entire Hetan Peninsula, including the Yaluan people, needs to be saved by the gods. From the moment you were captured, your personal mission has ended. From the moment you were assassinated by the second batch of assassins, you have been abandoned by Yaluan. The gods have given you a chance to choose again. May I ask if you are willing to be loyal to Macedonia? I will not kill you. If you refuse my request, I will let you go." Merlin only thought about it for a few breaths, then he got up and bowed, swearing allegiance to Macedonia. In addition to him, the great warrior Moira and the others also submitted to Macedonia because of their own considerations. They had suffered all kinds of humiliation along the way. As long as they were still alive and did not want to give up, they must wash away their shame through achievements and glory. Philip II gave them the best advice. "I can ask you not to attack Yaluan, but to deal with the Baz people on the battlefield in the future." Philip II was willing to patiently subdue these captives, on the one hand, to show the ambition and generosity of a monarch, and on the other hand, of course, it was related to the oracle of Zeus. The oracle did not say who the person who was very important to the kingdom of Macedonia was, so Philip II had to deal with it carefully. After dealing with the captives, Philip II carefully asked Izen, the captain of the diplomatic missions guards, about what had happened along the way. He was very interested in the matter of Amon and Madanzo, and asked his aides to investigate. The results deeply shocked him. The information that a kingdom's intelligence system could understand was, of course, far beyond what an individual person usually saw and heard. When Philip II saw all kinds of information mentioned by his aides, he already knew who Amon was, but he could not believe that Aristotle had actually brought back a god from a foreign country. Amon's identity was both special and embarrassing. He was not the god that the Hydonians believed in, but he had come to Macedonia as a friend and follower of Aristotle. This determined that Philip II could not pay respects to him as if he were a god, nor could he listen to him as if he were listening to the oracle. But Philip II, a noble king, had never seen a god with his own eyes. He was very eager to see Amon, but he did not know how to meet him. Philip II hesitated for several days, and finally summoned Aristotle into the palace to consult him in private. Aristotle smiled and asked, "Your Majesty, you can't receive him as you would a god, but you are afraid of being disrespectful and being blamed by the gods, is that right?" Philip II nodded and said, "Yes, he is not the god that I believe in, but he is a god after all." Aristotle asked again, "Your Majesty, do you know how we should get along with the gods, and how we should view them?" Philip II moved his buttocks forward from the chair, leaned forward, and said, "Please enlighten me, sir." Aristotle replied, "For the beliefs of man, God is a happy and perfect self-realization in pure thought, and the true God is an existence that transcends this world. The world that we can perceive is imperfect, there are all kinds of life and desires, imperfect thoughts and desires, and all living beings can more or less feel God. Philip II shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand." Aristotle smiled and said, "Then let's talk about Tong Meng. He is a friend I knew in my early years, a child who grew up in the town of Duk, retired Supreme General Igut, and now a traveler in Macedonia. The person you will meet is him, and he is not perfect in this world. How he is depends on his purpose in coming to earth. If your majesty wants to see him, it depends on your majesty's purpose. You can do it in your own way, as long as it is reasonable." Philip II nodded and said, "Oh, I see, thank you very much, sir." The next day, Philip II ordered Aristotle to be rewarded and hosted a private banquet in the palace. At the same time, he also invited the two heroes who had helped the delegation on the way to attend the banquet. Philip II wanted to express the gratitude of the Kingdom of Macedonia in person. Ammon and Madanzo followed Assyria to the palace, and Philip II finally met the gods. If Philip II did not know the identity of Ammon, as a king, he would only sit there and wait for the eunuchs to inform him, but at this moment, he personally came to the door of the banquet hall. Aristotle walked over with Ammon and Madanzo, and introduced the two heroes to the king. Ammon also bowed to Philip II naturally. Philip II hurriedly stepped forward to stop them and said, "Two heroes, there is no need to be so polite. Today, I specially prepared a banquet to thank you." After taking their seats, the king took the initiative to toast, and Ammon also calmly raised his glass. Philip II had many questions in his mind, but the first thing he said was, "Mr. Ammon, you have been to many places, may I ask why you have come to Macedonia?" Ammon replied, "I came to the Hetan Peninsula to travel, and I wanted to see Mr. Aristotle, so I came." Philip II asked again, "After coming to the Hetan Peninsula, how do you see the situation here, and how do you see the future of the Kingdom of Macedonia?" Ammon smiled and looked at Philip II, saying, "It is up to you, not me. I would like to ask, what is your Majesty's vision for the future of the Kingdom of Macedonia?" Philip II replied, "My idea is to unite the entire Hetan Peninsula into a unified alliance, and it was because of this that we were able to repel the attack of the Baz. And now, because of the internal strife in Hilton, the Baz people will make a comeback." Ammon smiled again. In fact, both Yaron and Gabata had the same idea, but they used the wrong method and were destined to fail. You have the hope of fulfilling your vow, but there are many enemies on this path, and if the day comes when your vow is fulfilled, you will find that it is not the end of your desire. Philip II sighed. Of course, a vow is not easy to fulfill, but no matter how many enemies there are, I will do my best. If that day really comes, then we can talk about other things. I am not a god and cannot understand more. However, Ammon shook his head and said, "I used to think so too. I thought that the vow of the human world was not simple, so it was not easy to fulfill. It was only later that I realized that the simplest vow was the most difficult, and there were always more desires driving people forward. Your Majesty King, I admire your courage and ambition, and wish you good luck." Following that, many topics of military, politics, and the situation of the mainland countries were discussed at the banquet, none of which went beyond the scope of human affairs, but Madanzo was the most talkative. Ammon did not make things difficult for Philip II, nor did he disrespect the king and the gods that the king believed in. He behaved very calmly and naturally. Whether he was a god or not, he was that Ammon. Perhaps because of this, Philip II felt uncomfortable, and the king even felt vaguely uncomfortable. He was not disrespectful to Ammon, but subconsciously did not want to get along with Ammon face to face, because it did not feel good. When Ammon spoke, he looked straight into his eyes calmly, and his gaze seemed to be able to see through his soul, which made a king quite uncomfortable. Who would look at him like this? Who would talk to him like this? Philip II would rather offer sacrifices to the statue of the god on the altar than subconsciously drink with a mortal like this. Ammon did not deliberately put on the airs of a god, nor was he arrogant. He just said a few words calmly, but it made Philip II, who was usually praised by the people, feel a little uneasy. Offering sacrifices to the gods on behalf of the people also meant having the supreme glory bestowed by the gods in the human world. It was a completely different feeling to sit at the same table with the gods and drink with caution, not daring to breathe, and feeling uncomfortable all over. After the banquet, Philip II personally saw the guests to the gate of the palace, and then breathed a sigh of relief. Aman did not make any more requests, and Philip II could not make any special arrangements, so he still let Aman live in Aristotle's mansion. He did not want to see this god again, but he could not let go of this matter, so he ordered his son, Alexander, to go to Aristotle's mansion more often to consult his teacher. Aristotle was Alexander's court tutor, teaching him all kinds of knowledge. In the past, the location was, of course, in the palace, and the time was also convenient for Alexander. But now the situation had changed. Philip II specifically told his son to go to Aristotle's mansion every day to listen to his teachings, and also secretly told him the identity of Aman. It was not difficult to understand why Philip II would do this. After all, Aman was a god, with abilities that mortals did not have, and secrets that mortals did not know. Although Philip II did not believe in Aman, there was a god in Macedonia, so how could he not want his son to gain some benefits? As for what he could get from the god, it depended on Alexander's own luck. Aristotle was, of course, well aware of the king's narrow-mindedness, but he never pointed it out. From this day on, the location of Alexander's lessons was changed to Aristotle's mansion, and Alexander would come every day, sometimes to study, sometimes to greet his teacher. After Aristotle finished his lessons, he would let the prince play in the mansion as he pleased, and he could go find whoever he wanted. In Aman's view, Aristotle might be the best teacher for Khitan, and Philip II was indeed very insightful to be able to invite him. But Alexander's student did not think so. He was the son of Philip II, the future heir of the kingdom of Macedonia, and he could have anything he wanted, and he could learn anything he wanted according to his interests. He was not a young miner in the town of Duk. Alexander was naturally active, and preferred martial arts to literature. In his eyes, Aristotle was more or less a pedantic old pedant. Out of respect for his teacher, the prince often bit the bullet to learn all kinds of knowledge, but only for the sake of completing his tasks. He only hoped that the lessons would end soon so that he could go riding and hunting, or gather the guards to practice military formations. Chapter 3:17. Alessandro was very curious about the unknown and liked to talk about military campaigns and battles. However, he was not like other children who only played around with guns and sticks. Instead, he seriously discussed all kinds of strategic issues, which suited his temperament very well. Aman lived in seclusion in Aristotle's mansion and did not have much contact with others, so it was not easy to meet him. However, Madanzo often talked with Alexander about everything under the sun. From the information that Philip II knew, Madanzo was also an extraordinary person, and might even be another god. The king also specifically told Alexander to respect Madanzo as he respected his teacher. It was not difficult for Alexander to do this. Madanzo was a person who liked to show off his power, and was usually cheerful and did not put on any airs. Alexander deliberately made friends with him, and the two got along well. Alexander was only 18 years old this year, but Madanzo saw the shadow of the young David in him. David Solomon was a disciple of Madanzo, and Madanzo liked the Duk miner of his youth very much, but the current lord of Talang disappointed him a little. David Solomon's ambition was to build a kingdom of the Talang people, and out of love for his disciple, Madanzo still hoped that David could achieve his wish. David demolished the temple of Ammonius and changed the main shrine of Talang to the shrine of Alor River. Although the gods did not care, they escorted Aesop out of Talang. David Solomon had achieved the 7th level of the power of origin, but his biggest vow now was to build a kingdom of Talang. His achievements in the power of origin in this life would probably end there, because he was pursuing another kind of achievement. When Madanzo saw Alexander, he thought of the young David Solomon again. He liked this child very much, perhaps out of some inexplicable mentality of compensation. Perhaps he felt some unspeakable regret that he did not bring David into the Garden of Eden, and did not help him realize his wish to build a kingdom. Alexander had been influenced by his father since he was a child, and his life wish was similar to that of David Solomon, but more ambitious. He wanted to conquer the unimaginable Potsdam Empire and avenge all the people of Hilton. Youths were the most imaginative when they were frivolous. This seemed like a dream to others, but Alexander told Madanzo very seriously that he had this wish. Madanzo neither ridiculed nor attacked him, but patted him on the shoulder and said, "So young boy, you have ambition. It's just that the road has to be taken step by step. Now even the Hilton Peninsula has not been unified, so there is no need to talk about how to conquer the Potsdam Empire. Regardless of whether wishes can be realized or not, the real difference between empty talk and action is in talking about what will happen in the future." "What are you doing now?" Alexander wasn't just spouting nonsense. He had been studying military formations and the art of war, and he had his guards practice formations. It was like a child's game, but he was very serious about it. After getting to know Metatro, he had been pestering Metatro to teach him about the local customs, population distribution, previous wars, military command, and other aspects of the continent. Aristotle had also been to the continent and experienced wars. Naturally, he would teach Alexander these lessons. However, when the sage talked about military issues, he mostly talked about national strategies. Madanzo was the captain of the guards who charged and broke through the enemy lines. He often talked about a series of strategic commands and tactical arrangements, from the formation of the army, the cooperation of the various arms, the logistics system, to the charge duel, the rotation of the battle formation, the close combat, and other details. Aristotle taught his students how to look at the world, and Madanzo became another teacher of Alexander. Alexander might have learned from Madanzo how to conquer the world. Madanzo did not deliberately teach in this way, but Alexander would learn the necessary knowledge from his own perspective. One day, Madanzo asked Alexander, "You know my origin and story. If one day, you really conquer the Pots Empire, and David Solomon has the opportunity to establish the kingdom of Kurang, will you support and allow it?" This sounded like a joke, but Alexander knew that people like Madanzo would not ask casually. So, he replied seriously, "If the people of Kurang want to establish their own country, they must get rid of the rule of the Pots Empire. This is the same as my goal. If my wish to defeat the Pots can be realized, it will also help them." Madanzo nodded. "Very well, I hope you will not forget what you said today. Let me ask you again, David Solomon destroyed the Temple of Ammon, which disappointed me. If you were in the same position one day, would you do the same?" Alexander replied very seriously, "I swear to the gods, never. If I can reach Iga one day, I will personally sacrifice to His Highness Ammonius, and rebuild the Temple of Isis." This child actually knew how to add flowers to brocade, and said the idea of rebuilding the Temple of Isis on his own initiative. In his heart, he was very clear about how to please Ammon. Ammon was a warrior from the Temple of Isis, and under the recommendation of the saintess of the Temple of Isis, Maria, he became the commander of the army. Among the ancient gods of the various divine clans on the continent, Ammon respected the goddess Isis the most. Rebuilding the Temple of Isis did not harm the glory of Ammonius, but placed a deep meaning of remembrance. He did not expect this 18-year-old child to have such a mind. He was indeed intelligent. When Alexander replied, Madanzo faintly heard a cough in his soul, but he could not tell if it was from Zeus in the sky or Ammon in the human world. Madanzo patted Alexander's shoulder again. "Let's go, don't just sit here and chat all day, take me to the barracks of Macedonia." A few days later, one morning, Ammon and Aristotle were talking in the study room, when Madanzo came in with Alexander. Alexander said excitedly, "Mr. Ammon, Teacher Aristotle, I have something to show you." He ordered his guards to bring in a sand table model. The terrain of the sand table was an open field at the foot of the mountain, on which stood a formation of soldier dolls. At first glance, it looked like a bare grove. Ammon frowned and asked, "What formation is this?" Alexander replied, infantry formation. Amon said, these soldiers are standing very densely. Are they holding spears in their hands? According to the proportion of height, it is actually 20 feet. I have never seen such a tight battle formation, and such a difficult weapon to control. How did you think of it? Alexander said, it was teacher Madanzo who helped me think of the idea. It solved the biggest problem of the Kingdom of Macedonia's military. Madanzo smiled and waved his hand, I just gave him some inspiration. This child organized people to practice and figured out the military formation. In fact, there are already armies in the Khitan Peninsula like this, but there has been no systematic practice. Aristotle stood up and waved his hand at Amon and Madanzo, saying, don't speak first, let His Highness speak. Then he asked Alexander, what problems does the Kingdom of Macedonia have in the military? How did your formation overcome those problems? Alexander stood in front of the sand table and began to explain one by one. Macedonia was the most powerful state in the northern part of the Khitan Peninsula, and its power was no less than that of Euron and Gabados in the south. But in the eyes of a knowledgeable general like Madanzo, Macedonia, and even the entire Khitan Peninsula was just a small place. It could not be compared with the former Igut, Babylon, Hittite, Assyria, and other countries, not to mention the huge Potsdam Empire. The Khitan Peninsula was mountainous, and the Kingdom of Macedonia had a rare open plain, but more than half of the country was still mountainous. It was difficult to fight here with the chariot formation that was common in the battlefield of the continent. Because the scale of the city was relatively small, the number of heavy cavalry was also very small. Often, only wealthy nobles could afford the armor and weapons of knights. In war, it was usually a small number of cavalry and a large number of infantry to charge and kill each other. It was difficult to build and operate chariot formations here, and there were not many cavalry either. In addition, the biggest problem was that the number of warriors was limited, and it was difficult to form a traditional regular army like the traditional army of the continent. Among the regular armies that Amon had seen in various countries, except for the abnormally powerful Uruk Legion, the standard formation was basically 5,000 warriors and 50 priests, and the official soldiers and warriors were at least level 1 warriors who had awakened their bloodline power. This was because the biggest fear of a large army in a battle was that it was difficult for ordinary people without strong bloodline power to carry heavy weapons. Even if they could carry it, it was difficult for them to advance with the battle formation and launch continuous attacks. For a country with a large population, it was not difficult to form a few regular armies. As for the combat effectiveness, it depended on the level of training and logistics. But this was difficult to achieve in the Khitan Peninsula. In the conflicts between the cities of the Khitan Peninsula, in addition to the citizens of the city who brought their own weapons, there were also many wandering mercenaries who fought in the war. Most of them were ordinary farmers, and although they were strong, they were not warriors. Therefore, the war between the cities of the Khitan Peninsula was a little chaotic. Only a city like Gabados, which was so abnormal that it was completely built by military means, could form a strong regular army. Among the official citizens of the city of Gabados, all adult men were warriors. If they did not awaken the power of their bloodline, they would be eliminated by cruel training before the age of 20. The warriors of Gabados could form a battle formation with strong combat effectiveness, but it was difficult for other cities to follow suit. The shields of the warriors of Gabados were very heavy, and they needed to be tied to the left arm with a belt to hold it flat. The spears they wore could be used in close combat or thrown. The ordinary warriors of the other states could not meet this requirement at all, so they were always at a disadvantage in a head-on confrontation with the warriors of Gabados. If they followed the conventional train of thought, with the expansion of Macedonia's sphere of influence and population growth, more and more people would try to practice martial arts, and the lucky ones would awaken the power of their bloodline and become warriors. Then, they would form an army and train them according to the traditional way of the continent, but who knew how long it would take, and there would be many difficulties. Under the inspiration of Madanzo, Alexander created a new type of battle formation, which emphasized on formation and coordination. The first change was the main weapon. It was no longer the traditional throwing spears, nor the battle axes, swords, and shields, but a spear that was 20 feet long. Madanzo was also a master of martial arts. He told Alexander that for ordinary warriors, learning to use swords and axes took a long time, but after simple training, almost everyone could master the most basic assassination techniques of the spear. Moreover, the cost of forging other weapons was relatively high, and large-scale equipment was very expensive. Wooden spears were relatively the cheapest. Alexander took this idea to the extreme, and designed a spear that was as tall as 3 people. Such a long spear was very difficult to control. To be able to freely wield it in a chaotic army, one had to be a warrior with astonishing strength. However, Alexander did not require the warriors to have this ability. Instead, he used a tight formation to attack. The techniques used in battle were relatively simple, and the more important thing was to organize and coordinate their strength. The tight formation could not be messed up when advancing. Madanzo helped Alexander make a spear that was about 20 feet long. When forming the formation, the spear tip pointed to the sky, and the spear butt rested on the ground. The position of the hand was just right for the battle. Such a spear had to be made as light as possible, but it had to be very flexible. The butt also had to have a counterweight so that the center of gravity was between the hand grip, so that it was easier to maintain balance when stabbing. When marching, the spear could be placed on the shoulder and pointed to the sky. When approaching the enemy, the first row of warriors would hold the spear horizontally, the second and third rows would point their spears diagonally forward, and the ranks at the back would follow at an equal distance. From the front, such a tight formation of spears looked like a hedgehog that had nowhere to bite. Even a strong warrior would not be able to display his strength in such a formation. If an army formation was formed in this way, it would solve 3 headaches at the same time. One was the source of soldiers. In addition to warriors, strong ordinary people could also be incorporated into the formation, greatly expanding the scale of the regular army. The second was financial. Its equipment was not expensive compared to other weapons, and it could be produced in large quantities in a short period of time. The third was the effective use of soldiers. It was difficult to build a large-scale chariot army on the Khitan Peninsula, so this battle formation made full use of the advantages of infantry. Why did Madanzo make the spear so long? The distance from the front of the soldiers was just longer than the length of a chariot. After Alexander finished his slightly proud introduction, Aristotle frowned and asked, "Well, your formation has indeed solved the biggest problem of the Kingdom of Macedonia. But what is the biggest problem with such a formation?" Alexander replied, "I have already let the guards practice it. With such a long spear shaft and a tight formation, it is impossible to dodge in battle. They can only advance, and the advancing line must not be messed up. This requires focused training. You have to make the orders and the steps uniform. If the soldiers at the front fall, the soldiers at the back must immediately replace them. If you violate the orders, you will be severely punished." Amon smiled faintly and said, "This is a problem of usual training. Formation is the simplest and most important training for a large army. In battle, this formation can only advance, and it is difficult to turn around. It is the same when marching. Leaving the state of battle and entering the state of marching, the commander will have to give at least 3 orders to change the direction of the formation. How fast you can complete it depends on your level of practice." Alexander nodded and said, "Yes, I let the guards line up in 16 rows, and it was done very well. But if you let ordinary soldiers form a large-scale battle formation, you will have to put in a lot of effort in training." Amon pointed to the sand table and asked, "In a state of engagement, this kind of battle formation is very strong at the front, but the flanks are very weak. This is not something that can be made up by training. If the enemy flanks from the rear, what do you plan to do?" Alexander replied, "It is precisely because there are not enough warriors and the number of cavalry is limited that I thought of letting strong ordinary people form a battle formation. In this way, the freed warriors can form supporting battle formations on the flanks and the rear, and the flanks can also be protected by cavalry." Amon pointed to the sand table again and said, "Such a dense spear battle formation has 2 fatal weaknesses. First, if you encounter a volley of archers, you won't even be able to dodge. Second, if the battle formation is intertwined, and the morale of the enemy is high, they will not retreat even at the cost of casualties. You can't fight in close combat with a spear, and what if the soldiers with blades and shields get in front of you? Alexander revealed a look of hesitation and scratched the back of his head as he thought, the range of the arrows is limited. Using the cavalry on the flanks to launch an attack and cover the advancement of the battle formation is a solution. In the future, when the Kingdom of Macedonia becomes more powerful, we can also equip these spear soldiers with short shields and short swords. Ammon smiled and said, "You thought of this battle strategy because the number of warriors is limited, and you can't form a large-scale army. It is very valuable to promote, and it is very likely to cause a major change in military history. However, I still suggest that the first 3 and last rows of this spear formation still use regular warriors." Alexander blinked his eyes and thought for a long time, and said with some disappointment, "I thought my idea was perfect, but after you asked, I realized that this battle formation has a lot of weaknesses. It is not as strong as I thought." Madanzo opened his mouth to comfort him. There is no perfect battle formation in this world. It is already a kind of perfection to be able to exert the greatest combat power under the current conditions. The same tactics can be imitated by anyone, but in peacetime, it depends on training and military discipline, and in wartime, it depends on the command and logistics. This battle formation of yours weakens the difference between individual combat power, and solves the most important problem of the source of soldiers. It is also a pioneering work. With the current situation of the Kingdom of Macedonia, it is the most suitable. Didn't Mr. Aristotle say that the world we perceive is not perfect, but you have to be clear about its shortcomings and know how to avoid them? This is the difference between a genius and a mediocre person. Child, take this sand table to see your father and tell him what I said just now truthfully. He will know what to do. Aristotle also waved his hand and said, "Your Highness, there is no need for today's lesson. Take this sand table and the guards to the king's palace. His Majesty will definitely be surprised." Chapter 318. Ammon said thoughtfully. The formation of the legions on the continent is likely to change because of this. The battle formation that Alexander used today maximized the existing advantages of Macedonia. I'm afraid that the future generations don't understand that when the situation changes, they still stick to the old rules. This is how they win and lose. Madanzo, are you thinking of accepting disciples again? In fact, there is no need to feel sorry. Everyone has their own pursuits. Even if the power of origin is awakened, the hope of becoming a god is still slim. Alexander's vow is to be a king, so let him be a king. You feel sorry for him, but who in the world is not worthy of being a king? Ammon stayed in Macedonia and did not attract any attention. Except for a few people who knew his identity, most Macedonians did not even notice his existence. As for Madanzo, this handsome and majestic warrior was very eye-catching, but most people did not know his special identity. They only knew that he was a foreign warrior who had helped the diplomatic mission on the road and was highly regarded by Prince Alexander. After listening to Alexander's suggestion, King Philip II asked in detail about the conversation between His Royal Highness and Ammon and the others. Then, he gathered the ministers to discuss military reform and formed the First Legion in this way. Although Macedonia was the most powerful state in the northern part of the Hetan Peninsula, it only had 1,800 warriors who had awakened the power of their bloodline, and there were only a little more than 1,000 standing cavalry. Philip II maximized the combat power of the infantry and formed the pike battle formation, which later became the Macedonian phalanx that shocked the continent. The first commander of this regular legion was his son, Alexander. Alexander became the commander at the age of 18. This was not only a test from His Majesty the King to his successor, but also a more important reason was that the new infantry battle formation was created by Alexander. This legion was officially organized into 4,096 pikes, and every 1,024 pikes formed a 1,000-man infantry squad led by a general. Each 1,000-man squad had 4 pike phalanx, and each phalanx contained 256 soldiers. Among them, every 128 soldiers formed a combat unit, and they could take turns to fight in battle. This basic combat unit was further divided into 2 squads, each consisting of 64 people, commanded by a captain. Philip II sent the most experienced generals of the kingdom to assist Alexander in his military training, and Madanzo often gave Alexander pointers and gave him advice. These 4,000 spearmen were the core of the army, and Amon had already pointed out the fatal flaw of this formation, so they had to train the various units to coordinate and protect the flanks. The cavalry and auxiliary infantry were also important combat strength of this army, and most of them were regular warriors. Philip II had the ambition to unify the Sidon Peninsula, and in order to achieve it, he had to start by building this legion and let Alexander establish his authority in the process of building the legion. Alexander, the 18-year-old army commander, was the future heir of the Kingdom of Macedonia. Philip II also hoped that he could gradually control the military from now on. Ever since the return of the diplomatic mission led by Aristotle, the shameful treachery of the Eurone people had been made public. Everyone was waiting for Philip II to send troops to suppress the Eurone people. However, when the new legion was formed, Philip II's first target of conquest turned out to be Delphi in the middle of the Sidon Peninsula. The name of the first legion that Alexander personally formed was called the Delphi Legion. When Philip II decided to lead the army himself, he decided to leave Alexander in Macedonia to supervise the country, and His Majesty the King personally took over the position of army commander. This legion had a chief priest and 2 deputy chief priests. The former high priest Eurone, Merlin, was one of the deputy chief priests, and the great warrior Imolai, who had surrendered with Merlin, was also one of the 4 generals who commanded the 1,000-man squad. It took a year to build and train the legion, but when it was time to go to war, he was left behind. One could imagine how depressed Alexander was. Philip II said to him, "My son, don't worry, everything in Macedonia will be yours in the future. Delphi is a very special place for all the Sidonians, and there are some things that are not suitable for you to do." How special was Delphi? It was the Holy Land of the Olympian gods on the Sidon Peninsula. In terms of scale, Delphi was only equivalent to a small city-state. It had no walls and was built halfway up a mountain. Its main buildings were various shrines, and its main residents were the priests of the various shrines, as well as the slaves offered to these priests by the various city-states. As everyone knew, there were a total of 12 main gods in the Olympian divine system. The main gods that each city-state believed in were different, and they each had their own way on earth. However, the existence of the concept of the United Kingdom of Hilton was not only due to geographical reasons. Although the city-states had their own governance, there had always been a pan-Hilton alliance, and the core of this alliance was the Delphi Oracle. When the city-states of Hilton wanted to act jointly, they would send representatives to Delphi to ask the gods for instructions. The oracle obtained here was called the Delphi Oracle, and it had the highest authority that surpassed the oracles of the city-states. The annual sacrificial ceremony here was attended by representatives from all the city-states. It was the most important sacrificial ceremony of the United Kingdom of Hilton. Therefore, Delphi's status was nominally independent of the city-states, and it was not involved in the civil wars and disputes between the city-states. However, Delphi's seemingly transcendent status was inevitably affected by the complex political and military affairs of the human world. When the Eurone alliance dominated, the right to issue the Delphi Oracle was controlled by the Eurone people, and it was also the Eurone people who led the city-states to offer sacrifices to the gods in Delphi. Now the Eurone alliance was in a difficult situation. The Gabados alliance had the absolute upper hand in the struggle for hegemony, and the right to issue the Delphi Oracle was controlled by the Gabados. This was common in the history of the Heaton Peninsula. Often, the most powerful city-state grasped the right to issue the Delphi Oracle by force, and thus became the de facto leader of the United Kingdom of Hilton and Heaton. However, what Philip II wanted to do was different from his predecessors in history. According to the original tradition, he had to make the city-states surrender, establish the most powerful Macedonian alliance, and then try to control the Delphi oracle. However, he simply sent troops and decided to directly occupy Delphi, which would inevitably cause fear and opposition from the other city-states. By doing so, Philip II would cause all potential enemies to become open opponents, but he still decided to do it. This might have something to do with the Oracle of Zeus, but the more important reason was that Philip II did not just want to be the overlord of the Khitan Peninsula, nor did he want to establish a powerful Macedonian alliance, but to unify the Khitan Peninsula into a complete country. If he succeeded in occupying Delphi, it would lay the foundation for the Kingdom of Macedon to completely unify the Khitan Peninsula in the future. If he unfortunately failed, it would be an act of making enemies, and it might even offend the gods, exposing all potential enemies. So this time, Philip II decided to go into battle himself and did not let his heir, Alexander, participate. At Alexander's age, it was the time when he was naturally adventurous and impulsive. Such an important matter, and it was the legion he had built himself, but he could not participate in it himself, so he was naturally unhappy and uninterested in doing anything. At this time, he remembered Aristotle, the old pedant who always taught him, and ran to his teacher to complain. Aristotle smiled and comforted him. It is the most normal thing for the king to go into battle himself and leave the heir to the throne to oversee the country, and this is also your responsibility. Why do you sigh when you are shouldering the responsibility of dealing with it yourself? Alexander said somewhat dejectedly, I understand this, otherwise I would not have stayed in Macedonia obediently. But that is the battle formation I created myself, the legion that was built and trained by myself. To carry out such an important task, I have no chance to participate, unable to personally verify its combat effectiveness, and enjoy the glory and achievements. Aristotle advised again, war not only means glory and achievements, but this war will determine the future of the Khitan Peninsula, and even the status of the gods. No one will let a 19-year-old general who has never been on the battlefield command, it is irresponsible for the fate of the entire kingdom. If your father succeeds, the glory and achievements will still belong to you, because it is the legion you built and trained, but the command on the battlefield should be handled by someone more experienced. Summing up the gains and losses of this new tactic in actual combat will allow you to better drill and train the army in the future. If this expedition is unfortunately unsuccessful, or even if you offend the gods, it will not be your fault. The kingdom of Macedon is still there, and you will inherit it, as well as all the experience and lessons. What your father is doing is, in fact, shouldering the possible accusations and removing as many obstacles as possible for you. You should not sigh, but be full of gratitude. Aristotle was clearly telling Alexander that the dirty and tiring work should be done by Philip II, and the consequences of offending the gods and the infamy would also be borne by him, but the obstacles on the road would be swept away, and the glory and achievements would be left to the future heir. Philip II may not be a kind and wise monarch, but from his father's point of view, what he did for Alexander was close to perfection. Alexander calmed down a little. Of course he could understand these reasons, but he still asked somewhat reluctantly, I heard that when Mr. Ammon was the commander of the Andila Legion of Igut, he was only 19 years old, and that was also the legion that he and teacher Madanzo built and trained. If Mr. Ammon was left behind when the expedition was launched, what would he think? Aristotle smiled slightly, you can ask Ammon. Ammon happened to walk in and replied calmly, Your Royal Highness, my situation is different from yours. I do not have the responsibility of supervising the country, and my purpose in going to the battlefield is to save my people. At that time, the Andila Legion was only a secondary division, purely to attract the enemy's attention, and no one expected me to win the war. The real main force of that expedition was the Horus Legion and the Legion of Isis led by Pharaoh, and it was because the main force was defeated that I was able to make achievements. And the Delphi Legion that you formed today is the main force of the Macedonian army, led by your father himself. Are you using me as an example because you want your father to fail and wait for you to succeed? Alexander hurriedly stood up and explained, I have absolutely no such thoughts. Ammon nodded and said, If you do not have such thoughts, then don't sigh like this. When we sigh, we must be clear about what we are sighing about. Alexander could not help but always behave in front of this god. He bowed and said, "I understand, thank you for your explanation, sir." Aristotle added, "Your identity is not just a legion commander, and your interest cannot only be in the military. You will inherit this kingdom in the future, and now you can learn from the ministers how to deal with all kinds of government affairs and solve all aspects of governing a country. Now that you understand, hurry back to the palace." Alexander left, and Madanzo walked into the room, frowned, and said, "Philip II attacked Delphi first, which is a move to make enemies, and may offend the gods. Whether he wins or loses, he is stirring up a hornet's nest." Ammon said with a faint smile, "I am afraid that is the intention of a certain god. To unify the Hetan Peninsula is to unify the realm of Olympus, and to complete this task, the kingdom of Macedonia must first control the holy land of the Olympian gods on earth." Madanzo added, "The current Delphi oracle was issued by the Temple of Apollo, and a long time ago, the Delphi oracle was issued by the Temple of Themis. This goddess Themis is not the Artemis you know, nor is she one of the 12 main gods of Olympus today. Have you heard of her?" Ammon shook his head and said, "I do not know very well. This situation may have been caused by the War of the Gods, because Zeus replaced the position of the original god of creation." Madanzo asked again, "But why is the current Delphi oracle issued by the Temple of Apollo?" Aristotle explained, "I don't want to interrupt about the gods, but I know Khiton's history better. According to the ancient legend, in the War of the Gods you mentioned, Zeus won, and Apollo may have contributed the most. This is the result of his victory. On the other hand, it may be that he had received the most offerings on earth. This is the result of historical inheritance. As for the goddess Themis, she is the goddess of fairness and justice in the Hetan myth, and the Delphi oracle was issued by her temple a long time ago." Madanzo smiled. If Philip II occupied Delphi and the kingdom of Macedonia controlled the right to issue the Delphi oracle, then I am afraid that the Delphi oracle would have to be issued by the temple of Zeus, and Apollo may not be willing. Ammon also smiled. "But Zeus is willing to see it." Aristotle smiled bitterly and said, "Do you remember the play you saw in Geron City? The temple of Apollo controlled the Delphi oracle, so this god was the most ridiculed on earth. In the play Oedipus, the words, 'Know thyself,' were engraved on the wall of the Temple of Apollo, referring to the Temple of Apollo in Delphi." Chapter 319. When Tengri II occupied Delphi, it was naturally impossible for him to openly declare that he was going to conquer it. Instead, he did so in two ways. One was to offer sacrifices to the gods and pray for the gods to bless the Hilton city-states to unite, the other was to ask the Father of the Gods to bless all Hiltonians and expel the Pot's empire from the Hilton Peninsula. Of course, the king had to bring his guards when he traveled, but Tengri II's guards this time were a little larger, an entire legion. Tengri II named this legion, which was formed and trained in a new way, the Delphi Legion, which had already shown his intentions. The Holy Land of the Hilton United Kingdom, Delphi, would be guarded by this legion in the future. Currently, Delphi was controlled by the Kabados alliance, and attacking Delphi would, of course, encounter resistance from the allied city-states led by the Kabados. However, Tengri II's timing was very good. The number of elite Kabados warriors was limited, and they were attacking the Euron alliance in the south. They could not spare the main force to fight Macedon in Delphi, and the scattered allied forces of the other city-states were no match for the Delphi Legion. As expected, Tengri II's move was strongly protested by the Kabados, who denounced the Macedonians as invaders of the Holy Land. According to the tradition of the Hilton United Kingdom since ancient times, Delphi was nominally a holy land shared by all city-states, and all those who attacked the Holy Land were the common enemies of all city-states. The Kabados called on the city-states to organize an allied force to fight against Macedon, and they also dispatched a small army to come. The city-state of Euron, which was fighting with the Kabados, did not send troops to Delphi, but they also publicly condemned Tengri II's crime of invading the Holy Land. Alexander, who stayed in Macedon, was very worried when he heard the news. He felt that the scouts could not keep up with the situation at the front line in time, but he was also worried about his father's safety. He knew that he could not get Amon to help, so he begged the resourceful Madanzo to secretly go to the front line to spy on the situation. He did not ask Madanzo to participate in the battle, as long as he informed him of the situation in time. Amon turned to Metatro and said, "If that's the case, you should go. There is no need to show yourself or do anything, just tell me what happened there truthfully. Since I can't be a god here, and this is not my realm, I can't use the means of the gods to understand things so far away. But I have a feeling that this is not only a battle between humans, but also the Olympian gods." Madanzo accepted the order and left. After about half a month, the frontline battle report had been sent back to Macedonia. Tingli II's army had achieved a complete victory and occupied and controlled Delphi. The Delphi legion that Alexander had established was well-deserved. Alessandra finally heaved a sigh of relief and felt exceptionally happy. However, Madanzo still hadn't returned, and he couldn't help but start to worry for Madanzo again. It took another 10 days for Madanzo to return to Macedonia. This level 9 oracle descended from the sky with his body hidden. He went straight to Aristotle's residence to see Amon. Amon asked, "What happened? What took you so long?" Metatro sighed with lingering fear in his heart. "Tragic, too tragic. In the Battle of Delphi, dozens of divine emissaries fell." He didn't say much and directly used message magic to imprint what he saw into Amon's soul. Just as Amon had predicted, the new battle method created by Alexander was a military revolution. The new battle formation emphasized strict military discipline and overall combat effectiveness. The resistance forces from the various cities collapsed at the first encounter. They were simply unable to fight against the Delphi Legion of Macedonia that had an absolute advantage in numbers, discipline, and training. The 3 warriors sent by the city of Gabados were the last to arrive, and they thought that they could win easily. But this time, it was no longer the Battle of Hot Spring Gate. The allied forces of the various city-states that had cooperated in the battle had been defeated. When the 3 Spartan warriors faced the orderly Macedonian army that was like a moving mountain of spears, they could not display the advantage of individual combat power at all. They wanted to retreat to a high pass and regroup, but the Macedonian cavalry on both flanks had already cut off their retreat. The infantry took advantage of the situation and pushed forward, wiping out the Gabados warriors. The battle between the 2 armies went smoothly, and Tingli II easily won. However, there was another battle that no one knew about, and it was extremely tragic. The Holy Land of Delphi was made up of many temples built on the mountainside. Almost all the Olympian gods had temples here, including some ancient gods from before the War of the Gods. This was something that could not be seen in the other cities of Khiton. In a sense, the Olympian gods could be regarded as a large divine system that contained many small divine systems. The Olympian gods would not directly participate in the battles of the cities of the human world, but that did not mean that they would not intervene. The simplest way was to order the divine emissaries in the human world to intervene. In such a sensitive event as the occupation of the Holy Land of Delphi, various divine emissaries who usually did not show up and only focused on training the power of the origin appeared one after another. Madanzo, who was watching in the dark, found that many divine emissaries usually hid in the temples as priests. The temples of the gods in Delphi were guarded by at least one divine emissary. Such divine emissaries were not necessarily eye-catching, nor did they necessarily have a high status. For example, a powerful 9th-level divine emissary in the Temple of Apollo was usually an ordinary low-level priest in charge of the candles. The military action of Tingri II caused conflict among the Olympian gods. Some supported it, while others opposed it. The gods did not directly take action, but sent out divine emissaries one after another, launching a chaotic battle. This battle unfolded in the sky above the peak not far from Delphi. Many divine emissaries died, and even Madanzo, who had experienced many major battles, was frightened. Madanzo was also a 9th-level divine emissary, so he could better understand the cruelty of this kind of battle. With the guidance of the power of the origin, it was possible to pass the test, have endless life, and even have the opportunity to transcend eternal life. This was a great fortune that was rare in the human world. Therefore, these divine emissaries rarely fought with mortals, and they were used to solving problems through agreements like the gods. But this incident was completely different. According to the battle report of the Macedonians, when Tinri II entered Delphi to give his speech, there were thunderbolts and light shining from the distant high mountains, which was a symbol of the gods' blessing to Macedonia and all the people of Hilton. And according to what Medanzo saw with his own eyes, it was actually the divine emissaries who were engaged in a chaotic battle. This chaotic battle lasted until the end of the battle between Macedonia and the allied forces of the various cities, but finally came to an abrupt end. All the divine emissaries who had not yet fallen stopped at the same time, confronted each other in the sky for several days, and then withdrew from the battlefield. Perhaps the gods saw that the divine emissaries had suffered too heavy a loss and did not want to fight anymore. After all, it was not easy to guide a suitable divine emissary. Or it could be that the Olympian gods had reached a compromise or made a new agreement, but these were not what Medanzo knew. Amon also saw the chaotic battle in the message conveyed by Medanzo, and the scene was indeed very tragic. Even the immortal gods could not guarantee that they would not fall if they were involved in it. There was another thing that shocked him: the Olympian divine clan was far more powerful than he had previously thought. Just the divine emissaries who participated in this chaotic battle, there were several whose achievements and magic power were not inferior to Medanzo's, and some of them had fallen. They should be the elite force of the Olympian divine emissaries, and although not all of them, they were already a bit stronger than all the divine emissaries guided by Amon's divine realm after the fusion of Anunnaki and Ennead. Although Amon did not fully understand the situation of the Olympian gods, judging from the power of the divine emissaries, the strength of the divine clan was also beyond Amon's expectations. Amon frowned and asked Medanzo, "The information you showed me seems to be incomplete. There were so many powerful divine emissaries present, and the gods in the divine realm must also be paying attention. During the chaotic battle, you may have lurked and peeped, but when they finished fighting and confronted each other in the sky, how could they not find you? You must have been exposed. How did you come back?" Medanzo replied a little embarrassedly, "It's embarrassing to say too much. I was indeed discovered later, so I quickly fled, but a few divine emissaries had already come over and wanted to stop me. Fortunately, there was actually one person who knew me and did not stop me, so I took the opportunity to escape." "Amon, who? How could he know you?" Medanzo reminded, "Have you forgotten? Typhon, the gatekeeper of the Osiris underworld, is that three-headed golden hound. Didn't he later follow Lord Xue Ding to join the Olympian divine clan? It was him that I met, and I also heard the voice of Lord Xue Ding in my soul. Since you did not intervene, why don't you leave?" Amon was surprised. Xue Ding also spoke. "It seems that the Olympian gods are also paying attention there. You can't escape their eyes." Medanzo said worriedly, "My God, I always feel that something is wrong." The Olympian emissaries fought so fiercely, and then suddenly stopped. The gods in heaven must have reached some kind of deal. Letu's actions were obviously guided by the oracle of Zeus. This is really poking the hornet's nest. And you have been in Macedonia all this time, the Olympian gods can't not be suspicious. I am afraid that we have nothing to do with this matter. I am afraid that it is not the truth, and the gods will not believe it. I am afraid that you are being used by Zeus, and Zeus is using you to divert the conflict between the gods to achieve his own goals. Don't you think that our entry into the Olympian realm has been too smooth, and the days have been too peaceful?" Amon frowned again. "I have an agreement with Zeus. I can't act as a god here, but I promise to cooperate with him to unify the Hetan Peninsula, and the Kingdom of Macedonia is the choice. After that, the story of Marduk will be repeated, and the divine realms of the continent will be integrated. My purpose is only to find a way to prove it. If he used me, then I also used him. If the Olympian gods really reached a new agreement and diverted the conflict to me, then I asked for it, and I will face it." Medanzo, you have not experienced a real battle for a long time, and you have been watching the disputes of the world coldly, and occasionally intervening is just out of interest. If you really get involved, will you be afraid? Medanzo raised his eyebrows. Afraid? When have I ever been afraid? Then he could not help but sigh again. My God, you are so right. The days of peace have indeed passed for too long, and the peace has almost made me not feel the conflict in my heart. Until today, when I saw the fall of those emissaries with my own eyes, I know that the challenges I face are far from over, and I have not felt so frightened for a long time. Not only Medanzo, but Amon himself was also lost in thought. Since the creation of the kingdom of heaven, Amon did not seem to know what to do. Perhaps he did not need to do anything, and only needed to enjoy eternity in the kingdom of heaven like many gods. Perhaps there were still many things to do, because his kingdom of heaven was not yet perfect, and the world created in his soul could be more colorful. But after the achievement of surpassing the God of creation, Amon did not realize his original vow. He was essentially no different from the gods that he had once despised and ridiculed. That was why Amon left Seleng and came to the Khitan Peninsula to start a new experience. In the process, he pursued the unknown path, and also gained a lot of new insights. Indeed, as Medanzo said, since Amon came to the Khitan Peninsula, he felt completely different from before. The days were too peaceful, and he could hardly feel the conflict in the peace, which was not normal for him. Whether it was the human world or the gods, it was far from peaceful. The Olympian gods had already erupted in conflict, and there would certainly be some conflict between them and him. Just then, a servant outside the door came in. Mr. Amon, someone wants to see you. Amon asked loudly, who is it? The servant replied, it's a young lady, very beautiful, and she claims to be Xue Ding. What a strange name. Does Mr. Amon know her? Amon quickly got up and said, invite her in. Then he said to Medanzo, go to the palace, Alexander has been worried about you. Medanzo, I'll go to the palace now, I won't disturb your meeting with her. Sure enough, she was the first to come, and she must want to tell you something. We also have to be careful about the Olympian gods. As Medanzo left, he passed by the goddess Artemis, who had just entered the door, and did not forget to greet her. Amon came to the door and smiled. Xue Ding, if you want to see me, just come directly, why do you need someone to inform you? Artemis did not smile, but said with a straight face, you are here as a mortal, and I come to see you, of course, I should see you as a mortal. As she spoke, she waved her hand and covered the room with magic, isolating the sound inside and outside. Even the gods could not secretly spy on the conversation between the two. Amon invited her to sit down, leaned close and said, you should know about the war between the cities, and you have also heard about the conflict between the Olympian gods. Did you come to me today to announce a decision on behalf of the Olympian gods? Artemis glared at him. Of course not, I am not here on behalf of the gods. It is only because I care about you that I came to warn you before the gods come to trouble you. Amon was still smiling. The Olympian gods want to trouble me? I have always kept my promise, never acted as a god, and never offended them. Chapter 320. Amon had promised to cooperate with Zeus, to complete a pioneering undertaking. To foster a powerful city-state, punish Euron and Gabados, unify the Hellenian Peninsula in a real sense, and then cross the straits to the west to conquer the entire Persian Empire. Only gods like them dared to imagine such a grand undertaking. This city-state would be chosen by Amon, as long as the main god that the city-state believed in was Zeus. Zeus and Amon would work together as god and man, respectively, to promote this matter. And Amon chose the Kingdom of Macedonia, a small state that would not only punish Euron and Gabados, unify the Hellenian Peninsula, but also attack the Potsdam Empire in the future. It was not that whoever Amon chose would have this achievement, but that the Kingdom of Macedonia had the best potential, so Amon chose it. After making the agreement with Zeus, Ammon had been acting as a mortal, waiting for an opportunity to rescue the mission led by Aristotle, and brought Medanzo to the kingdom of Macedonia with the mission, and Zeus sent down an oracle at the right time. Ammon came to Macedonia, living in seclusion and not attracting attention. It seemed that he did nothing, but everything that happened was going according to the plan of the two gods. A god like Ammon did things so mysteriously that everything seemed to happen intentionally or unintentionally, and he seemed to have done everything, pushing things forward at the most appropriate time in a way that people could not perceive. Only by looking back and thinking about it carefully could one suddenly understand. Macedonia, which was internally stable and had no strong enemies outside, had formed a brand new legion. With this legion as the main force, Philip II's first target turned out to be Delphi, the holy land of the Hellenian United Kingdom. Of course, the Olympian gods knew that Ammon was in Macedonia, and as soon as Philip II went to war, even if the mortals did not know what Ammon had done, the gods reacted. This move of Zeus first touched the interests of some of the Olympian gods, and was about to break the pattern formed in the human world since the War of the Gods. It attracted the opposition of a group of gods led by Apollo, so the messengers of the gods broke out in such a fierce battle in Delphi. While the oracles fought fiercely in the human world, the Olympian gods quarreled fiercely in heaven. The gods were divided into three factions. One faction was naturally led by Zeus, the father of the gods, and supported Zeus' decision. The other faction was led by Apollo and included 7 of the 12 main gods of the Olympian pantheon. They had all followed Zeus and won the War of the Gods. They all accused Zeus of colluding with Ammon to intervene in the disputes of the human city-states, violating the interests of the gods, and violating the agreement. There was also a faction led by Themis, the goddess of justice and fairness. Most of them represented the ancient gods before the War of the Gods. They were relatively neutral and mediators of this conflict. Especially Themis, who had always played the role of the adjudicator of the disagreements of the gods in the divine kingdom. Zeus first proposed for the oracles on earth to stop fighting and wait for the gods to reach a new agreement. This proposal was supported by Themis, and Apollo and the others also agreed. Apollo asked Zeus to disclose the agreement between him and Ammon, as well as the purpose of the conflict, what role Ammon played in it, and what was his purpose. This request was also supported by Themis. Zeus then calmly told him everything. He told the gods his plan, which would bring greater benefits to the Olympian pantheon in the future, and what Marduk had done. Marduk came to the human world as Darius and invaded the Olympian pantheon with the purpose of integrating the divine realm. Only by unifying the Olympian pantheon could they retaliate against Marduk's invasion. Zeus was not only retaliating for the sake of revenge, but for him, it was also a kind of confirmation. For the entire Olympian pantheon, this was the first invasion by another pantheon. If there was no counterattack, how could they prevent similar incidents from happening in the future? Moreover, this was also good for the Olympian pantheon, as it could shine the light of the gods all over the continent. Zeus promised that with the expansion of the divine realm in the future, the gods would be able to guide their believers and oracles in a larger area of the human world, and obtain more divine realms. The losses in the internal disputes would be made up for in the external expansion. The gods were persuaded by him and reached a compromise and a new agreement, so the emissaries of the human world left the battlefield. The Olympian pantheon had reached an agreement to unite against foreign enemies, and Zeus' goal was achieved. The rest was up to the kingdom of Macedonia, and the gods would cooperate and help. Then there was one person who seemed very conspicuous and unnecessary, and that was Ammon, who was still living in the kingdom of Macedonia. Ammon did not come for the Olympian pantheon. He agreed to cooperate with Zeus to explore his own path of confirmation. He was another king of heaven, and if the Olympian pantheon wanted to seek benefits in the expansion, then the existence of Ammon would be incompatible, and sooner or later there would be a conflict. Now that Ammon was in Macedonia, it would inevitably have an impact on the king of Macedonia. For example, Alexander had promised Medanzo, if I can reach Iga one day, I will personally offer sacrifices to His Highness Ammonius and rebuild the temple of Isis. If Ammon was allowed to stay, the future achievements and benefits of the Olympian pantheon might be inexplicably stolen by Ammon. Even if Zeus could tolerate it, the Olympian pantheon would not agree. On the other hand, the pantheon had reached a compromise, and the conflict was transferred to the outside world. Ammon had become a target of hatred for Apollo and others. After all, they had suffered heavy losses in this dispute. Even if they did not pursue Zeus, they could still pursue Ammon. So Apollo proposed to expel Ammon from the divine realm of Olympus. Zeus objected because he had an agreement with Ammon, and Ammon did not violate it. The pantheon began to quarrel again, and Artemis, who represented the neutral side, made a ruling: Ammon could not be expelled in the name of the Olympian pantheon, and the gods would deal with their own personal grievances and bear the consequences themselves. Zeus, the father of the pantheon, also agreed with this ruling. When the pantheon reached a final agreement, Artemis came to remind Ammon immediately. She had the most special relationship with Ammon among the Olympian pantheon, and her situation was also the most awkward. So she came to see him as a girl and explained the situation with a straight face as soon as she entered. Ammon understood the whole story and said gratefully, "Thank you for coming to see me in this situation and telling me all this. Aren't you afraid of the gods' suspicions?" Artemis said angrily, "What am I afraid of? You did not violate the agreement, and I cannot expel you in the name of the Olympian pantheon. The gods can only deal with it as a personal grievance. Based on our personal relationship, of course I have to remind you that even if someone is dissatisfied with you, they can't attack me." Tong Meng asked with a smile, "I'm a little curious. The battle between the gods on earth was so fierce, and many people died. And the gods in heaven have been arguing and negotiating, and did not do anything themselves." Artemis replied, "What's there to be curious about? When Zeus established the heavenly kingdom, he made the gods make an oath that they could not attack another god because of internal affairs. When the gods of this pantheon challenged the gods of other pantheons, they could not attack the gods of this pantheon. When the gods of other pantheons challenged the gods of this pantheon, they could not help the gods of the other pantheon." Ammon said, "This is very much like the covenant between the city-states of Khiton, and the Olympian pantheon is also like an alliance. Zeus did this very wisely, to prevent the gods of the pantheon from challenging his position, and to prevent the history of him defeating the previous god of creation and fusing the divine realm from happening again." Artemis nodded and said, "The kingdom of Khiton is the realm of Olympus, and the city-states believe in the gods of Olympus. What happens on earth must reflect the scene in heaven, which is the source of a civilization." As for the oath that Zeus made the gods make, it was also a lesson learned from the War of the Gods and the history of other pantheons. Ammon said again, "But the gods still fight." Artemis explained, "Yes, the gods in heaven do not directly fight, but fight with the emissaries through the cities on earth." Ammon said thoughtfully, "War of agents. I came from the ancient town of Duk in the east. It is said that the continent is the center of the world, and Olympus is the new pantheon of the west. So what you are talking about is the tradition of the west. The Olympian pantheon made a decision this time to shift the conflict and unite against the outside world. It seems to be the source of a habit to resolve internal differences by outward expansion." Artemis asked, "Have you seen the city-state republic of your own? It is very similar to the situation of the Olympian pantheon today. There is a saying you should have heard, Euron is the Euron of the Euron, the empire of the Chitons. People are not gods, they will act according to the guidance of the gods as they understand them, with their own desires. This kind of inheritance will still manifest in various forms even after thousands of years. Ammon, I am not here to discuss this with you, but to remind you that it is best to leave here first, soon someone will come looking for trouble." Ammon shook his head and said, "I have not violated the agreement, why should I leave here? Isn't it good that you can see me here? We meet as mortals on earth." Artemis's face finally showed a gentle expression, and she held one of Ammon's hands and said, "I heard that you have promised Zeus that the Olympian gods can enter your divine realm, and I can see you at any time, right? But now the gods want to deal with you, even if they are not as powerful as you, they will use all kinds of methods and means. Since you can't act as a deity, you'll definitely suffer. Why do you still want to stay here? Ammon still smiled and said, since I have promised to cooperate with Zeus, I will naturally encounter such things, and the test I have experienced is also part of the verification. How can there be no trouble? If there are no problems, why should I seek verification? The means that the Olympian gods use to deal with me are the test I have come here. You can say that I have only myself to blame, but I will not leave voluntarily. This is the price I must pay in the course of exploration. Artemis clenched Ammon's hand and said with concern, I am not here to persuade you to leave because the gods want to force you to leave. You have not fully understood what I mean. I have a feeling that Zeus is using you and scheming against you. I know this father of the gods better than you do, and you are seeking verification, and he is also seeking verification. At this point, Artemis did not continue, but imprinted a message into Ammon's soul, telling him of her guess and judgment. Both Ammon and Zeus had achieved achievements beyond the gods of creation and created their own divine realm. She did not know the name of this realm, and Artemis called it the God of Gods, according to the ancient prophecy of the plains of Duk. But whether it was Zeus or Ammon, they were faced with a potentially serious problem. What should they do if other gods in the divine system achieved the same achievements in the future? In the ancient divine system, if a god also achieved the achievement of the God of creation, they could break away from this divine system and no longer be bound by the oath. They could establish another divine kingdom and another divine system. For example, Seth's wish was like this. But the situation of Zeus was different. He surpassed the gods of creation and achieved the achievement of the God of Gods, fused with the divine realm of the original God of creation, Unos, created the divine realm of Olympus, and made the gods make an oath to prevent similar situations from happening again. But if another god in the divine clan also achieved the achievement of the God of Gods, how could the two gods of gods coexist? Zeus could not prevent another god from creating his own divine realm. If another divine realm was created in the eternal realm, it would lead to the division of the divine clan and violate the oath of the gods. If it was extended and created in the original divine realm, it might no longer belong to Zeus completely, and it might also lead to the collapse of the divine realm, and it might even lead to the fusion of Zeus' divine realm. The consequences of all this were unknown, and although the possibility of it happening at present was very small, it was not impossible in the long future. So Zeus had to seek a higher achievement, and this realm was his own divine realm, able to fuse or accommodate the same divine realm in some way. But the gods' search for proof of an unknown realm was not groundless, otherwise Ammon would not have come to the human world to explore. Wanting to fuse the same divine realm was like a person wanting to know if he could eat an apple. Then there needed to be an apple in the world for him to try. Now there were only two apples that Zeus could find, Ammon and Marduk. The world of freedom, created by Marduk, was quite different from the divine realm of Olympus, created by Zeus, and it was obviously a search for proof of another path and could not be compatible. And Ammon's kingdom of angels was very similar to Zeus' divine realm. Zeus and Ammon cooperated to deal with Marduk. Wasn't he also thinking about Ammon? Chapter 321. 302. Too cool. If the process of Marduk's incarnation of Darius establishing the Potsdam Empire was proof of his creation of the Mahasvara, then the process of Zeus unifying the Hetan Peninsula with the help of the rise of Macedon and conquering the entire continent was his exploration to prove his higher achievements, and Ammon was a very important part of it. The divine realm of Olympus and the divine realm of Ammon's kingdom of angels would collide sooner or later. At that time, if Ammon still wanted to establish a foothold on earth and have a divine realm, there might be two outcomes. One was to fall in the inevitable frontal conflict, and the other was that his divine realm would somehow integrate into the Olympus divine realm and coexist. In other words, if Ammon was defeated in the conflict and wanted to fulfill his promise and leave a guide of faith on earth, then he might join the Olympus divine clan as the Lord of Heaven and let Zeus integrate his kingdom of angels into the Olympus divine realm, which was an unprecedented attempt. Ammon was a god outside the Olympus divine clan, and whether Zeus succeeded or failed, at least he would not cause the collapse and division of the Olympus divine realm. The process of all this was Zeus' path to a higher realm, and when he could try it, it would be the most rare opportunity. To describe it in the simplest way that mortals could understand, if the Macedonian Empire rose and annexed the entire continent, including Igut, what would Ammon do? He had to abide by his oath and leave a guide of faith on earth to heaven. Unless he had fallen, he would cooperate with Zeus and let Zeus try another kind of fusion. Would Ammon want to see this day come? In fact, whether he was willing or not, he had to make a choice when the time came. The beginning of all this had now appeared, and Ammon was personally involved. As a god, Artemis had already seen the seeds germinating. How could she not worry about Ammon? This was the case for Zeus, and it was another case for Ammon. Ammon was the one and only god. Even without the matter of Zeus, if one of the angels he guided in the future reached the same achievement as him and could create a heavenly world, then what should Ammon do? They believed in Ammon as the only god. This sincere belief was also included in the achievements of the angels, and it was also their oath to join the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, the problem did not lie with such an angel, but with the Lord of heaven, Ammon. Ammon had to be able to integrate the newly created heaven world of the angel with the entire heaven, becoming the new connotation and extension of the kingdom of angels. Don't forget Ammon's vow: if I can become a god, what kind of god will I be? I myself don't like those gods, and I even loathe them. With this belief, no matter how much I cultivate, I won't be able to become one of those gods. This is decided by the test of origin power. If one day, when I will pass the test of fate, the judgment of the end, my wish is not to join or establish that kind of god or become that kind of god. I hope to build a home in my belief, which can guide all who yearn for it, and not be guided by gods. The so-called gods are no longer gods, but gods in people's beliefs. People can choose a heavenly home in their lives, or endure the hell-like torment in their hearts. This is my wish to become a god, and the path under my feet will eventually lead there. Later, Ammon became a god, and later, Ammon achieved achievements beyond the creation of the gods and created heaven, but his vow was not fully realized. The one and only god was not only a title. The realm that Ammon wanted to prove was actually higher than the realm that Zeus wanted to prove. It was even incredible. Ammon had been doing this, just like people in the world who worked hard for their ideals. But for gods, wishes, implementation, and real achievements were two different things. He had not realized the vow before he became a god, so he was still exploring, and that was why he came to the Hetan Peninsula. This was the reason why Ammon agreed to cooperate with Zeus. But in Artemis's view, he was also shooting himself in the foot. If Zeus's plan succeeded, Ammon would instead become a stepping stone for Zeus to seek a higher realm. If he was wise, Ammon should leave the Hetan Peninsula now and not participate in this matter. After listening to Artemis's thoughts, Ammon nodded slightly and said, "Schrödinger, you are right, this is indeed the situation I will face. But if I do not embark on this path, how will I know the answer? Those ambitious men on earth also have to face tests in order to realize their vows, and the test I face is probably more difficult than Zeus's." Artemis pursed her lips. "Ammon, are you still going to stay here?" Ammon replied, "At least I won't leave on my own accord." Artemis raised her eyes to look at Ammon and said, "Your achievements are higher than mine. What I can understand, you can naturally understand too. I just told you everything that happened in Olympus. Since you have made your choice, when that day comes, I hope you will not make it difficult for me." Ammon held her hand and said, "Schrödinger, I will never make it difficult for you." At this moment, another servant came in from outside the door. "Mr. Ammon, another young man named Phoebus is here to see you." Artemis stood up and said, "It's Apollo, he is indeed the first to come." Apollo is very arrogant and straightforward. Among the 12 Olympian gods, he is the most powerful one after Zeus. "I think he is here to challenge you." Ammon asked, "Challenge me? In what name?" Artemis said, "In his own name. Of course, he has a reason to attack. You have to be careful." Artemis left from the backyard without meeting Apollo. When the servant came in with a young man, even Ammon's eyes lit up. He waved at the servant and said, "You can leave first. I have something to discuss with this gentleman." As soon as the servant went out, Amon waved his hand and set up a magic circle, covering him and a lobo in the center of the circle to prevent the movements in the house from disturbing the outside world. The god in front of him looked less than 30 years old, and he was the most handsome man Amon had ever seen. He wore a robe with one shoulder bare, and he held a beautiful harp in his other hand. Apollo had a broad forehead, firm and confident eyes, and wore a laurel crown. His long hair hung down to his shoulders, his body was well-proportioned and fit, and his face was impeccable. He stood there with an indescribable masculine charm. Amon's disciple, Madanzo, was already quite handsome, but compared to Apollo in front of him, he was clearly lacking something. If this god was here to compete with Amon's handsomeness, then Amon had already lost. Amon greeted him in a calm tone. "Are you Apollo? I have seen your statue and thought that the craftsman carved the most beautiful man imaginable, but when I see you in person, I feel that the statue is far from being able to capture your splendor. Have you also come to see me as a mortal? When you were outside the door just now, you attracted the attention of passers-by." Amon's last sentence was obviously teasing, and Apollo's expression was cold. "I have also come to see you as a mortal. It seems that Artemis has just left." "Amon, yes, she has just left. I think you should first express your apology for disturbing my meeting with her. If you have something to say, just say it. I have come to challenge you." At the same time, he used message magic to explain the reason for his challenge to Amon. Philip II's capture of Delphi caused a quarrel among the gods, and the messengers of the gods fought fiercely. Although a new agreement was reached in the end, Apollo suffered the greatest loss. The Delphi oracle was the most authoritative oracle in the Hetan Peninsula, and it had always been issued by the temple of Ariabo on behalf of the gods. This was the result of Apollo's victory over the ancient goddess Artemis in the War of the Gods, and it made him the most important god in the Olympian pantheon after Zeus. In the human world, more people offered sacrifices to Apollo than to Zeus, the father of the gods. In the history of the Hetan Commonwealth, the number of city-states that worshipped Apollo was also the largest. This period of history lasted until the end of the Hippocratic War, when the Euron League rose, and Yelena became another more important god. The Delphi oracle, which represented the highest authority, was still issued by the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. Philip II sent troops to occupy Delphi, and the Holy Land of the Hetan Peninsula was under the control of the Kingdom of Macedon, which also indicated that this period of history was about to change. Apollo could not hold Zeus accountable, but he would be angry at Amon. Amon was a god outside the Olympian pantheon, and he had something to do with this matter. To Apollo, this was a challenge to his authority. That was why he came here. Amon looked at Apollo and replied, "If I accept your challenge in the name of a god, it will be a violation of the agreement with Zeus. Since you are here as foppers, how do you want to challenge me?" Apollo answered, "We can fight each other in eternity." Amon smiled and shook his head. "I will not leave because of your challenge, and I will not show the means of a god here. If you want to challenge me, you can do it as a mortal, and we will duel like warriors in the human world." Apollo nodded without hesitation. "All right. What will happen if you lose?" Still smiling, Amon said, "Since it is a duel, there should be a bet. The loser will retreat in front of the winner, no matter who he is. Do you understand what I mean?" Although Amon was smiling when he said this, the bet was really cruel. For a god, it was not easy for one side to retreat in front of the other. For example, if Amon was the victor and one day strolled to the temple of Apollo in a good mood, then the connection that Apollo had placed on the statue of Apollo would also have to be withdrawn and would not appear in front of Amon. This duel was very troublesome. If Amon killed Apollo in the divine realm of Olympus, he would publicly anger the gods, and it would become the invasion of another pantheon. It was very likely that the gods would beseech him, and it would lead to a chaotic war between the two pantheons. However, Apollo might want to take the opportunity to kill Amon. If he succeeded, the divine realm created by Ammon would disappear, and there would be no need to talk about the rest. Therefore, Ammon could not be killed by Apollo, nor could he easily kill Apollo. If Apollo was defeated, he would come back for more trouble, or ask a few other gods to help him. That would be a headache for Ammon. So he made this bet. He would simply let the loser disappear from the eyes of the winner, so as to avoid any future troubles. Hearing this, Apollo slightly curled up the corner of his mouth and said, "No problem. If you are lucky enough to survive after losing to me, you must never appear in front of me again. Immediately leave the Hetan Peninsula and hide in your divine realm. If one day I am interested in visiting the Igut, your statue must not open its eyes in front of me. What I suffered in the Battle of Delphi, you will suffer double." Ammon nodded and replied frankly, "The result of the Battle of Delphi cannot be said to have nothing to do with me. It is reasonable for you to have such a request. I once promised Zeus that the Olympian gods could enter my divine realm. But if I win, you will be excluded. Wherever I go, even if it is your divine realm, you will have to retreat." Apollo waved his hand. "Cut the crap. Where do we fight?" Ammon said, "Of course not here. Let's go to the suburbs. There is a place on the precipice of a mountain in the distance that is very suitable for you and me to fight. Don't worry, let's walk there. You can think about it on the way and back out at any time." Apollo said, "I only hope that you don't regret it." "Then let's go." Ammon said to the servants that he might be back late today, so there was no need to prepare dinner. Then, he went out with Apollo. He walked unhurriedly through the streets of Macedonia toward the outside of the city, while Apollo strode expressionlessly in front. Many passers-by stopped and involuntarily looked at Apollo, especially the women. They all exclaimed, "Who is this? God, he's so handsome. How can there be such a handsome man in this world? Oh my God, isn't this my dream lover?" Many girls even jogged behind Apollo, just to catch a glimpse of this handsome man. Ammon walked behind Apollo, like a follower or servant. All the glory belonged to the god in front of him, and no one noticed him at all. When they left the city, Medanzo quietly appeared beside Ammon. Ammon did not speak, but explained the cause and effect of the matter through message magic. Medanzo looked at Apollo, and there was also surprise in his eyes. This god did not have any eye-catching decorations. He only wore a crown made of cassia branches, an ordinary white robe, and held a harp in his hand. However, his every movement had a soul-shaking charm. He did not need to deliberately show off, and he could naturally make everyone gasp in admiration. Apollo walked through the streets, and his aura was even more eye-catching than Medanzo's. After watching for a while, Medanzo suddenly curled his lips and said, "So what if he is handsome?" He actually dared to challenge Ammonius. He must have taken the wrong medicine. Ammon could not help but laugh and said, "He did not take the wrong medicine, he knows very well what he is doing. You should also be able to learn something from this person. Sooner or later, you will also have such charm, and when you have it, you will not think as you do today." Apollo's voice suddenly came from his soul, "Ammon, are you going to attack with the oracle?" Chapter 322. Dozens of kilometers north of Macedonia, on the precipitous mountains, there was a relatively flat open land on the precipice. The open space in the forest was almost barren, with only a few strangely shaped boulders. This was the battlefield where Apollo challenged Ammon, and Medanzo followed the two gods here. Along the way, Medanzo had doubts in his heart. He did not think that Apollo could defeat Ammon, but he was also wondering how much Ammon would have to pay to defeat Apollo. From Apollo's aura, it could be seen that this god was powerful, confident, and absolutely proud. Confidence was also a kind of capital, backed by great power. Among the 12 main gods of the Olympian divine system, Apollo's combat power was second only to Zeus, and he had also made the most contributions in the War of the Gods. In terms of the achievements of the gods, Apollo was a little worse than Ammon, and he was similar to the peak of the creator. The Olympian divine kingdom was different from the divine kingdoms of other divine systems, and the achievements of the gods were also slightly different. Gods like Apollo could also attach themselves to the divine kingdom and create their own world, and this world was unfolding. This was not because Apollo's achievements were higher, but because Zeus, the master of the divine kingdom, had a higher realm. But such a creator's world would not change the appearance of the divine kingdom, nor would it be touched by other gods. It was just an independent landscape in the divine kingdom of Olympus. In Amon's kingdom of angels, there were also the achievements of angels who embraced the creator. For example, Ea, the god of wisdom of the original Anunnaki divine system, also had his own creator's world. When Amon merged with the divine kingdom of Anunnaki, Ea became an archangel, and his creator's world was completely integrated with the divine kingdom. This was related to the oaths made by the angels when they joined the divine kingdom, and it also showed that Amon had higher achievements. In terms of realms, Apollo was equivalent to the pinnacle of the creator realm, and he was a deity known for his powerful combat abilities. He had been a god for a much longer time than Amon, and he had a stronger accumulation. In terms of pure magical power, Amon might not be above him. Apollo's promise to duel with Amon as a human warrior was actually more beneficial to him. If they were in the eternal state of being unborn and imperishable, Amon might have even more profound methods. Even if his transcendence energy was inferior, he could still use other methods to make use of his strengths and avoid his weaknesses. But in the human world, the methods of the gods were limited, because this was not the world they created. This battle would be even more difficult for Amon, so Apollo was brimming with confidence. Medanzo looked at Apollo and thought to himself, duel like a warrior. If you want to compare fists, you've found the wrong person. Do you think you are a warrior like Enkidu who passed the test and became a god? Don't fight with Amon, you will be shocked when we fight. While thinking about this, Medanzo quietly asked Amon, you have given your most powerful weapon to your disciple, do you need to use the key of destiny? Amon smiled. There's no need for that. When I left Talang, I brought along my most convenient weapon. When we fight later, you hold the key of destiny and stand by the side to prevent disturbing the outside world. If someone tries to plot against us, you can also warn us in time. Medanzo said, no one will dare to hide in the side and plot against us, the eyes of the gods are watching, but I will also be careful. When they arrived at the arena of the duel, the two gods stood a foot apart from each other. This place was indeed dangerous. There was only the sound of the wind whistling above the high cliff. Between the two stood a strange giant rock, and not even a trace of a bird could be seen. With the key of destiny in hand, Medanzo retreated to the edge of the forest outside the clearing. Apollo's white robe fluttered in the wind, and he reached out to straighten the clothes on his shoulders, his posture was very elegant. As he moved, the whistling wind suddenly stopped, and the cliff was silent. He looked up at Amon and said, are you ready? You can start now. Even a fool would know that in a direct confrontation, the one who made the first move would have the upper hand. Apollo showed great confidence and let Amon make the first move. But Amon smiled and shook his head, Apollo, you are wrong about one thing. You are the one challenging me, not the other way around. If you don't want to fight, just admit defeat. Apollo's handsome face showed a hint of anger, and he picked up the harp and plucked it. With a clang, a murderous aura swept over. The strange boulders on the clearing twisted and wriggled under the light, but they did not shatter into pieces. Instead, they softened silently and disappeared like water. Outside the clearing, Medanzo was shocked. No wonder Apollo was so arrogant, his moves were indeed shocking. The magic generated by the plucking of the harp was accompanied by the most brilliant magic in the world. It was still elemental magic, not beyond what the mages in the mortal world could use, but it was a combination of all elemental magic and could control all forces in the environment. If the person facing the sound was Medanzo, he could only use the key of fate to protect himself. Everything around him would be crushed by Apollo, and there would be no room for him to use magic or fight back. The strange boulders on the clearing were swept away by the rippling sound waves, and as if they were instantly flattened by an invisible giant hand, the impact of the harp was already in front of Amon. There was one last boulder in front of Amon. It was flat at the top and about waist high, like a table or anvil. Amon stretched out a hand and pressed on the boulder. The boulder seemed to have become one with his body and soul, and the rippling impact dissipated. Amon was unscathed. The first attack was silently neutralized. Apollo narrowed his eyes and kept plucking the strings with his fingers. One attack after another, accompanied by the melodious sound of the harp, attacked Amon continuously. The sound of the harp was not dense, but it carried a beautiful melody. Apollo's posture was very elegant, but the attacks from his hands were getting stronger and stronger. Makazo was secretly shocked watching from the side. That was because Apollo had the upper hand as soon as he attacked. He seemed to be playing the harp leisurely, but he had blocked all of Amon's routes of counterattack. Amon was now in a situation where he could only use his magic to resist. If he could not break the sound, he could not even fight back. This was the most disadvantageous situation for Amon. Although Apollo was arrogant, he knew how to deal with Amon. Madanzo was a little anxious. Amon and Apollo were dueling, and the last thing he should do was stand still and fight with magic. After all, Amon had only been a god for a short period of time, and this was his weakest point. Even if his powerful magic power could last for a long time and was comparable to Apollo's, Apollo's magical harp was used against the bare-handed Amon. Even if Amon could last until the end of the battle, the result would still be a lose-lose. Just as Madanzo was frowning, Amon also moved. His movement was too unexpected. The god grasped with his left hand and pulled out an oval pebble out of thin air. It was the ore core extracted from the Parangan mine. With a wave of his right hand, he pulled out a sledgehammer. The hammer was not a magic weapon, but a mine hammer used by the Duk miners since ancient times. The hammer head was made of damask steel, but it was hard and heavy. The wooden handle was very tough. Infused with magic by Amon, it faintly emitted a faint golden light. This mine hammer was taken away by Amon when he left Leng. It was also made by him in his newly built courtyard. The hammer and the ore core were placed in a spatial magic tool and were taken out at this time. Madanzo knew the origin of the mine hammer, but he did not know when Amon brought the ore core with him. Amon placed the ore core on the boulder and hit it with the hammer. He had done this action countless times when he was young, and he was very familiar with it. But now, he was able to do it without any interference, which showed his powerful magic. Under the cover of Apollo's music, everything in the surroundings was in chaos. All kinds of elements seemed to be broken and fused, changing according to Apollo's music. As long as Amon showed the slightest flaw, Apollo would be able to control all kinds of attacks at will. In this battlefield, the only things that were not affected were Amon and the boulder in front of him. The mine hammer fell, and there was a ding sound. The sound was not loud, but it echoed for a long time, penetrating through the cover of Apollo's music. The heavy mine hammer was like a feather in Amon's hands. Countless fine cracks appeared on the surface of the ore core, which was harder than pig iron. The cracks spread and became dense, and then it turned into grayish-white powder and fell down. The crushed ore core scattered into powder and fell off the boulder, disappearing into the storm of music. Only a colorless, transparent parangan was left on the boulder. In the distance, Apollo's squinted eyes suddenly opened, and a trace of anger appeared on his face. The blow from Amon's hammer happened to hit right after Apollo's strumming. The sound was not loud, but it was very penetrating, disrupting the beauty of the music. What is Amon trying to do? Is Apollo playing his instrument? Is Amon opening his mine? I've never seen a duel like this. Not even warriors in the mortal world would do this. However, Amon did not care about Apollo's reaction. He took out another ore core, swung his hammer, and hit the boulder again. The powder fell into the storm of music, and another parangan appeared on the stone platform in front of Amon. Apollo was not the only one who was surprised. Even Madanzo's mouth was wide open for a long time. How could a duel between gods be like this? Apollo realized that Ammon was trying to disrupt the rhythm of his music. He closed his eyes and ignored what Ammon was doing. He continued to pluck the strings according to his own tune, playing a beautiful melody that was laced with a murderous intent. Apollo was not disturbed by Ammon's music. Apollo's heart was filled with murderous intent. As long as he could break Ammon's protective magic, he would win. No matter what, he had to break the last boulder on the ground. The melodious sound of the instrument was like the most beautiful music in the world. Apollo's rhythm had also changed. It was impossible for Ammon to calmly swing his hammer between two notes. This seemingly comical but dangerous duel went on for a while. Apollo suddenly realized that Ammon did not deliberately use the hammer to disrupt his rhythm. It was just a coincidence. Ammon didn't seem to care about what Apollo was playing. He was mining parangons at his own pace. Hammer after hammer hammered down, one parangon after another was extracted. Ammon was like the most outstanding and tireless miner in the world. He had already extracted tens of thousands of parangons, filling up the boulder in front of him. He waved his sleeves and put away the parangons. Then, he took out the ore cores and continued to mine. The mining techniques of Duk were very unique. They included both body arts and magic techniques. In other parts of the continent, extracting parangons from ore cores was usually the work of low-level mages. Apollo had learned a lot today. But he was very puzzled. Ammon's spell seemed to be fighting against his zither attack, but it also seemed to have nothing to do with the zither attack. Also, looking at Ammon's continuous action of taking out ore cores, how many ore cores did this god have on him? How long was he going to keep playing? Apollo was puzzled that there was someone more impatient than him. Finally, Madanzo asked, Ammon, where did you get so many ore cores? Ammon had specifically told Madanzo not to call himself Ammonius when there were other people in the divine realm of Olympus. Madanzo remembered it very clearly. Ammon replied unhurriedly, A while ago, I asked Alexander for a favor. I asked him to collect a batch of ore cores for me to extract parangons. But I didn't do it for free. It was a job. For every parangon I took out and gave to him, the kingdom of Macedonia would pay me 1 gold coin. If I damaged the ore cores due to my lack of skill, I would have to pay 30 silver coins for each ore core. What Ammon said was the truth. A while ago, he did look for Alexander and asked the prince to help him with such a small favor. The remuneration was also very fair. He was absolutely honest with both the old and the young. Alexander did not dare to neglect it and treated it as a national affair. He sent people to collect ore cores for Ammon, and Ammon kept them in his spatial artifact. Madanzo was startled when he heard this, and then his eyes brightened as he realized something. He asked with a smile, Ammon, are you trying to earn some money to spend? Ammon nodded honestly and replied, Yes, it's time for us to earn some money. We've been living in the kingdom of Macedonia for more than a year, and we haven't paid for our rooms and meals. Although Mr. Aristotle doesn't mind, how can we live and eat for free? Madanzo also nodded and said, Yes, I've also neglected it. Mortals in the world should do things like this. Guests have their own rules. How can a guest stay for such a long time? We can't accept the kindness of our host and take it as a blessing. We should still pay for our rooms and meals. Madanzo had followed Ammon for the longest time, and he understood the god's temper very well. He had already figured out what Ammon was trying to do, and he deliberately struck up a conversation with Ammon. What they said almost made Apollo's nose crooked in anger. In the duel field, Apollo took out his harp and plucked the strings. The beautiful melody was full of surging magic power and infinite murderous intent. His posture was so elegant, with an incomparably strong aura. In front of him, Ammon was not even worthy of a glance. However, Ammon's response almost made Apollo vomit blood. It turns out that this god doesn't take the duel seriously at all. Instead, he's mining for ore cores to earn money. Ammon chatted as he worked. Chatting did not affect his work, and he did not take Apollo seriously at all. He even treated the attacking god as if he did not exist. No matter how elegant Apollo's posture was, how beautiful his harp was, and how powerful his attacks were, it seemed to have become meaningless at this moment. Ammon, who was dueling with him, did not even look at him. This god had completely become a self-entertaining clown. Judging from the battle between the two gods, Apollo had the upper hand, and Ammon was just passively resisting. They would fight like this until the end, regardless of the outcome. As long as Ammon could not break through Apollo's harp, both sides would have to pay a huge price. However, Ammon was not serious at all. He chatted as he mined parangons. Did gods need to earn money? Even if Ammon wanted to earn money as a mortal, there was no need to do so at this time. Apollo was very powerful, which was why he was very confident, and because of that, because he was confident, he was proud. Because of his confidence, such an arrogant god was not afraid of a strong challenge. What he could not stand the most was the humiliation of contempt. Mining was one of the lowest forms of work, unless it was the extraction of parangons. It was usually done by slaves who had been whipped. Apollo's harp was so elegant and magical that even the emperors of the mortal world would not be able to hear it. How could Ammon face his challenge like this? This is too shameless, too evil. This attitude and behavior hit the soft spot of Apollo's arrogance. Apollo was angry, and the consequences were serious. His harp suddenly became urgent, no longer as soothing and graceful as before. It was as if thousands of golden snakes were dancing on the harp strings. His marble-like fingers plucked on the harp strings, emitting dazzling rays of light. These rays condensed great magical power that could penetrate through time and space, and shot towards Ammon, but were scattered in front of the stone table. There seemed to be an invisible barrier in front of Ammon, covering the stone table he was working on. However, Apollo's harp also contained a power that could penetrate the soul, which could not be blocked by any tangible magic. It must be resisted by a stronger soul. At this time, the surface of the giant rock was once again filled with the mined parangons. Ammon waved his sleeves and put them away. He then took out another ore core and smashed it with his hammer. With a muffled sound, the ore core broke into several pieces, but no parangons appeared. Ammon, the Lord of Heaven, one of the gods with the highest level on the continent, had accidentally destroyed the ore core with the skill he was most familiar with since childhood. This was simply unimaginable. However, under Apollo's powerful attack, Ammon did not control the hammer well this time. At this time, it could be seen that Apollo's magic power was profound and mysterious. He was definitely a strong opponent that Ammon had never met before. Even Metatro couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Ammon let out a long sigh and stopped his movements. He looked up at Apollo and said, "You really are good, you made me pay 30 silver coins." Apollo's fingers trembled, and he almost broke the strings of the divine harp. Such an earth-shattering skill that even the gods would admire was only worth 30 silver coins in Ammon's mouth. He finally could not help but shout, "Ammon, in a duel between warriors, whether you win or lose, you should respect your opponent. How can you be so rude?" Ammon did not answer. He took out another ore core and was about to smash it again. Medanzo, who was outside the battlefield, interrupted, "Apollo, you are so rude. I don't know what you used to be. Maybe you were a musician, and your harp is really good. But Ammon has been a miner since childhood, and mining parangons is a skill passed down in his family. His mining skills are no worse than your harp skills." Chapter 323. Apollo reprimanded Ammon, but Ammon lowered his head and continued mining as if he did not hear anything. Medanzo interrupted and retorted. Apollo turned his head and shouted, "What business is it of yours?" In the face of Apollo's majestic scolding, Medanzo took a step back and shrugged. "Indeed, not as much as me." Although Apollo was furious, he was still clear-headed. His attacks were still sharp, and he did not give Ammon any chance to take advantage of him. But when he turned his head to scold Medanzo, he was slightly distracted. The most arrogant god of Olympus could not bear such humiliation. Although Apollo turned his head to scold Medanzo, Ammon's every move was still under his tight control. He did not need to look to know every detail. Although there was a slight flaw in the storm of music, Ammon's movements did not change. He still swung his hammer and hit the rock, producing a soft, ding, sound. At this moment, there was an unexpected change in the battle. When the ore core was opened, a new parangon should have appeared in front of Ammon. Under the attention of the gods, all these details could not be wrong. But there was one thing that exceeded Apollo's senses. There was no parangon on the stone platform. Then there was a second change. Ammon suddenly disappeared. Even in a fight between two ordinary people, the most frightening thing was the unexpected. For example, one side would kick, and the other side would not expect the kick. Of course, they would not be able to prepare for it. There was a flaw in the music, and the rhythm was momentarily disrupted. Ammon found an opportunity. The impact of the hammer was so strong that even Apollo's next plucking motion could not help but freeze for a moment. What was even more surprising was the newly mined parangon. It was shining with a faint golden light. It was an extremely rare god's tear. The god's tear was a divine artifact made by heaven. Anything in the world could not be directly brought into eternity, unless it was refined into a divine artifact that could fuse with the mind. As for the god's tear, there was no need to refine it. As long as one could master its use, they could naturally fuse it with their body and soul. Ammon was probably the first god in the world to understand this kind of divine artifact. His body and soul had refined a god's tear. The moment the ore core was opened, the god's stone fused with Ammon's body and soul. This might have been an insignificant change, but it was beyond Apollo's perception. The ore core was opened, and the sound of knocking interfered with the rhythm, but not a single parangon appeared. Medanzo couldn't help but exclaim when he saw this scene with his own eyes. When the god's tear appeared, the hammer in Ammon's left hand disappeared. He clenched his right hand, and the god's tear turned into a golden glove. At the same time, his whole body was wrapped in a faint layer of golden light. By the time Apollo turned around, Ammon was no longer behind the rock. A fist shining with golden light was flying towards his face. The mining of the god's tear was an accident. An object that did not belong here suddenly appeared in the middle of a fierce battle. But whether this accident happened or not, Ammon would have seized the opportunity to counterattack. Apollo scolded Medanzo in anger. There was a momentary flaw in the sound of the harp, and Ammon's knocking disrupted his rhythm. The appearance of the god's tear was another kind of test for both gods. Ammon's reaction was faster than Apollo's. He was almost unaffected, and he naturally took advantage of this accident, as if he had such a glove on his hand. The golden light penetrated the sound of the harp, and the distance of a foot seemed to be non-existent. He disappeared from behind the boulder and punched directly in front of Apollo. The last boulder on the battlefield suddenly disappeared in the sound of the harp, but Apollo's attack did not stop. But Ammon had taken the opportunity to pass through the storm of harp sounds. With a bang, the cliff under his feet trembled slightly. Ammon's punch landed squarely on Apollo's handsome nose. It was too sudden for Apollo to dodge even if he wanted to. Ammon had been hammering away at the ore, as if he was going to do it until the next day. He was chatting with Metatro as he hammered away, as if he had forgotten about the duel. The arrogant Apollo felt humiliated. He scolded Ammon but did not get a response. He could not help but scold Medanzo, but Ammon retaliated at that moment. Would Ammon make his nose bleed? Of course not. The gods were a different kind of existence. They would only be hurt physically and spiritually, not like mortals who would be torn apart. In a moment of desperation, Apollo could only use his magic to resist the blow. At the same time, he tried to use spatial magic to retreat, but he was too late. Ammon's punch could collapse half the mountain. Apollo was so strong that Ammon only managed to make his nose crooked. Apollo's nose was almost crooked in anger, but this time, it was really crooked. The physical and spiritual damage of the gods could also be seen externally. For example, Ammon once saw Horus lose an arm. This was the state of mind of Horus at that time. But Apollo did not have the state of mind to keep his nose crooked. The punch had hurt him badly. He immediately used his magic to straighten his nose and restore his handsome face. But with such a short change of mind, Apollo did not dodge Ammon's second punch. Ammon's left hand was not gloved, but it was covered in a faint golden light. He stepped on the spot, bent over, and swung his fist at Apollo's stomach. How was this a duel between deities? It was simply a brawl in the marketplace. Apollo blocked Ammon's fist with the harp in his hand. There was a burst of strings, and even Medanzo, who was far away, had to take out the key of destiny and use his magic to block in front of Apollo. All 13 strings were broken, and the golden light on Ammon's fist shattered at the same time. But the punch still landed on Apollo's stomach. The harp was a divine artifact. The broken strings were not destroyed, and the broken strings could still wrap around Ammon's wrist. But Ammon had already retracted his fist. This punch broke the spatial magic that Apollo was about to use. He wanted to dodge, but he could not. The god bent over like a shrimp and was sent flying by Ammon. His head fell forward, and his hair flew. But Ammon did not have the slightest intention of slowing down. He jumped forward and reached out his gloved right hand to grab Apollo's head. When gods fight, do they fight like women fight? For example, Ammon. Apollo was not the only one who did not expect this. Even the gods who were watching the battle in the kingdom of heaven were stunned. Ammon had made it clear that he was not here as a god, but to accept the challenge like a mortal. However, when noble warriors dueled in the mortal world, they usually took out their weapons and swung their swords at each other, appearing very imposing and dignified. Who would do what Ammon did? But when he was a child in Duk, this was how he fought with other children. On a real battlefield, even if a general fell from his horse and fell into the enemy's formation, he would be surrounded by the enemy's ordinary soldiers. As a weapon, he could only use his fists to block. Unless it was a warrior like Enkidu, no one would be able to get close to him with a single punch. Otherwise, such a scene was very normal. In a battle, life and death were only a hair's breadth away. Why couldn't the head be pulled? Just now, his nose had been smashed crooked by Ammon's punch. If Ammon tore his head off, it would be really embarrassing. Apollo could not let Ammon succeed no matter what. He roared as he flew backward, tried to shrink his neck, and punched at Ammon's chest. Ammon met it with his left fist. The fists of the two gods collided. There was no sound, but there was an explosion of annihilating power. In the distance, Medanzo, who was holding the key of fate, could not help but kneel on one knee. The fists of the two gods shattered like the core of a mine, and their arms disappeared in the air. Their bodies were separated by the explosive force. This punch was a lose-lose. Ammon did not grab Apollo's head, but he tore off the laurel crown on his head. Ammon was injured. One of his fists was broken, but his reflexes were not affected at all. He grabbed the laurel crown with his right hand and shook it. The glove disappeared and merged with the laurel crown. The laurel branches spread out and turned into vines with golden light. They extended and sprinkled down, binding Apollo's body tightly. Ordinary ropes and vines could not bind a god at all. Apollo could break free with a transformation magic. But the vines that the laurel branches turned into were wrapped in golden light. Ammon used his great magic power to cast two kinds of magic at the same time, the entangling vine web he learned from Murin and the imprisonment of Isis he had always been good at. Apollo could no longer cast any transformations, and his power was instantly imprisoned. Ammon threw the bundled Apollo to the ground. This time, he did not use his divine power, but the fall still made dust rise. The duel was over. The glove on Ammon's right hand had disappeared. His left arm, which had dissipated, was gradually returning to normal. But the clothes from his wrist to his shoulder were gone. Apollo, on the other hand, was tied up tightly. He fell to the ground, unable to move. The crown on his head was gone, and his harp had fallen to the ground. His expression was one of shame and indignation. Ammon did not care how embarrassed Apollo was. He looked at him with his hands behind his back and said slowly, "Are you fighting or quarreling? Don't forget that we are dueling. It's over. You have lost. What else do you have to say?" Apollo growled, You. Ammon frowned and asked, "What about me?" Apollo shouted, "How dare you use such a despicable method in a duel between the noble gods?" Ammon curled his lips and sneered, "That's just because you think you are noble. Do you think my methods are despicable? Which one of my strikes is not honorable? You challenged me, and yet you expect me to fight in the way you want me to?" Yes, although Ammon's methods were shocking, they were not despicable. In fact, they were very open. Apollo played the harp, and Houran struck the oars. Both were skills that he was best at. Ammon struck the oars while chatting with Medanzo. Apollo's attack distracted him for a moment, and one of the oars was destroyed. However, Ammon also distracted Apollo. In his anger, he turned around to chat with Medanzo. Both gods were talking to Medanzo, and neither was taking advantage of the other. A god's tear appeared on the stone platform. Apollo's reaction was obviously slower than Ammon's, but he had his harp. Of course, Ammon could also use other divine artifacts. There was a flaw in the rhythm of the harp, and Ammon broke out of the encirclement. Who said that fists could not be used in a fight? Was it necessary to control a divine artifact and cast all kinds of dazzling divine spells to look magnificent and majestic? Apollo had been a god for too long. Even before he became a god, he had never fought like Ammon. But Ammon did not fall for it. Apollo was ashamed and angry, but he could not speak. Ammon ignored the god and turned to Medanzo, "The duel is over. Let's go back. Maybe we can make it for dinner." Ammon waved his hand, and a golden light flew back to his palm and turned into the god's tear. The cassia branch that was wrapped around Apollo disappeared, and it returned to the shape of a flower crown beside the harp. Apollo lay in the dust, seemingly unharmed. Ammon, however, did not look back as he walked down the cliff with Medanzo. Apollo stood up with a face full of shame and picked up the flower crown and harp. He almost did not dare to look up, for all the gods were watching. He was also a god known for his powerful combat abilities. How did he meet an opponent like Ammon today, and it was him who came to him on his own accord? Melodious singing came from the mountain path. It was Ammon singing a hymn, praising the god of youth and love. The song echoed in the wind, slightly desolate, but the melody was mellow with a natural beauty. In addition to striking or chorus, this god was not ignorant of music. In the Anunnaki divine kingdom, a beautiful goddess frowned slightly. "Is this song that Ammon is singing, praising me?" The speaker was the goddess of youth and love, and also the goddess of beauty of the Olympian pantheon, Aphrodite. In the distance, Artemis said coldly, "Aphrodite, don't be so smug. That song is indeed praising the god of youth and love, but it is not you, but the original Anunnaki goddess of youth and love, Murin." Ammon was born as a miner in the town of Duk, and Murin was once the patron goddess of Duk. That song is often sung by the miners of Duk when they offer sacrifices to their patron goddess. What Ammon sang was a song of the human world, and people outside the mountain could not hear it. However, in the eternal world, in the kingdom of angels that he created, the song was faintly discernible. Murin stood in the rose garden of heaven with a smile in her eyes, but her expression was a little indescribable. She whispered to herself, "My God, you brat. You are getting worse and worse, but also more and more adorable. Apollo really doesn't know his place, how can he be a match for you?" In the Olympian divine kingdom, Aphrodite was interrupted by Artemis, but deliberately pretended not to hear it. She said to another goddess beside her, "Yelena, I have never seen a god like Ammon. When he dueled with Apollo, there was no sign of a duel at all, but he suddenly broke Apollo's nose. It was like a street brawl. Apollo has been defeated, and you are the god of wisdom and the goddess of war. If it were you, would you have the confidence to defeat him? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.